As Seth lay broken on the ground, he gazed out at the ruined world. Its destruction seemed inevitable, and he wondered if humanity had already fallen to Hydra. The beast scoffed, declaring that all their struggles had been in vain, but Seth refused to accept that it was over. With the last of his strength, he threw a simple punch at Hydra, surprising himself when the attack actually affected the God of Death, even if only slightly. He was shocked to see that such a low-level melee strike had worked on the God of Death, and that the God of Death couldn't even disintegrate him. But it was too late. Seth's body was failing, and he knew he couldn't go on. Hydra prepared to land the final blow. Tauntingly, he said that the fun was over. At that very moment, the pendant Seth wore began to glow, reminding him of the gift from his headmaster. His headmaster had once told him it was the Emblem of Rebirth, housing the spirit of the tower within it. It would grant him the chance to undo one past regret, should he ever have one. Seth thought for a moment. He had never regretted anything in his life, so he wasn't sure if he would ever need it. His headmaster, reading his thoughts, simply smiled and said, "As expected of the Academy's top graduate. But remember, there may come a time when you will need it." Seth paused, remembering that his one regret was not choosing the path of a melee mage on that day. Next time, he vowed that he would surely defeat Hydra. Suddenly, he found himself back in a familiar classroom, where he had been sleeping. He awoke with a jolt, startled by a slap from Leo. Leo told him it was his turn. Seth was stunned to see Leo. He remembered that Leo had disappeared before the God of Death's arrival. Looking around, Seth realized he was back at the Magic Academy. It seemed he had traveled 10 years into the past, to the very day of his bitter defeat, now with a chance to change everything and defeat the God of Death. Leo asked Seth again why he was so distracted in the middle of the selection ritual. Seth snapped back to the present and nodded. He walked to the front of the class, where several professors stood alongside the headmaster. One girl whispered to another that it was Seth, and the second girl added that he had an aptitude for multiple paths of magic. The man in front of Seth opened a book that emitted a soft glow. Seth recalled that there were different magical paths, each one with its own unique set of spells. Once, a mage chose a path to specialize in, it became difficult to learn spells from other branches. It was much like trying to believe in two different religions at once. The man before him asked him to choose the path in which he wanted to specialize. He confidently told Seth that he was certain he would choose a particular one. Seth thought for a moment. Normally, he would have chosen the ranged magic path, which involved creating elements by using mana and launching them at opponents. This allowed mages to keep their distance from enemies, minimizing the risk of being attacked, and they could eliminate multiple opponents at once with area of effect spells. He would become the strongest mage if he chose long-range magic, but that wouldn't be enough against the God of Death. Seth turned away from the long-range magic option. Everyone was shocked. Leo, who was standing nearby, wondered what on earth he was doing. Surely he was going to choose ranged magic. Everyone questioned why Seth would pick melee magic, which seemed to be the most useless option. The man explained that melee magic focused on strengthening the physical body. It was considered outdated, and was only effective in close-quarters combat. He compared the situation to someone being attacked by a rain of arrows, with only a single pebble for protection. He asked Seth if he truly wanted to destroy his future, but Seth knew that by choosing melee magic, he was giving up any hope of becoming a renowned mage. However, this was the only magic that could help him defeat the God of Death. He couldn't abandon that hope. The room fell silent. As everyone watched him choose close-quarters combat magic, they were shocked, but Seth was determined. With this power, he would defeat the God of Death. When Seth made his choice, there was a collective gasp of surprise, and the students began to chatter. Silas, head of the long-range magic department, closed his book with a sigh, commenting that he had planned everything for Seth, believing he would choose long-range magic. By doing so, Seth would become the greatest mage, and bring fame and glory to Silas as his teacher. Seth, however, was not swayed by the murmurs around him. He knew that Silas's plans, though grand, wouldn't matter in the next 10 years. The world had only 10 years left before its destruction, and the first appearance of the God of Death was just 5 years away. Despite possessing all the memories of his past self, Seth lacked the necessary experience for close-quarters combat. He had no choice but to find a way to master it within the next 5 years. After the ritual was completed, the students were asked to return to their respective magic departments. Seth, unsure of where his classroom was, wondered where he needed to go. He looked for Leo but couldn't find him. He decided to ask a nearby boy for directions, but the boy, accompanied by a girl, quickly dismissed him, mentioning they were late. Seth watched the others who were already moving or ignoring him, whispering amongst their groups. He realized the journey ahead would not be easy, but was determined to find his way. A nearby boy commented that the rumors about Seth, being a prodigy, might be wrong, and that he was actually an idiot. Another boy guessed that Seth might just want to be the center of attention, and that's why he chose close quarters magic. Seth reflected on how everyone at the academy was acting so differently than before, and realized it was all because he had chosen close quarters magic. He decided to check the map, remembering there was a map of the academy in the central garden. As he walked towards it, he heard someone casting a fireball and quickly realized it was a battle. A girl was defending herself from the attack, extinguishing the fireball with ease. She then confronted a boy, demanding he hand over the item her mother had given her. 3 boys were bullying her, with the tallest one holding a brooch. He arrogantly claimed it was an artifact that contained mana. A second boy mocked, saying it was a waste to give it to a commoner like her and that they would make better use of it. Seth quickly understood that the girl was from the close quarters magic department, and she was fighting against 3 students from the long-range magic department. The leader of the bullies mockingly raised his hand and told the girl that, if she wanted the brooch back, she would have to take it from them using her useless close quarters magic. He then attacked her again with several fireballs. The girl responded by activating her physical boost, a core skill of close quarters magic that enhanced her physical abilities. Although an enhanced body could help her evade attacks, it would be useless if the opponent was out of reach. Undeterred, she then invoked the power her mother had saved for years to get the brooch. She asked them if they really after 80, they expected her to hand over such a precious item without a fight. She formed a mana blade, and Seth immediately recognized what it was. However, he doubted this would be enough to fight the 3 of them. The boy from the ranged magic department mocked her, saying she was trembling in fear and asking if she could even reach him with that short blade. He attacked again with a fireball, forcing her to retreat. He taunted her, saying it was exactly as he had predicted. She couldn't even touch them. Then, with a cruel smile, he launched another fireball, asking if this wasn't a perfect analogy for her entire life. As the fireball was about to hit her, Seth rushed forward, pulling the girl out of harm's way. He asked if she knew where the melee magic classroom was, and if she could show him the way. One of the boys realized it was Seth who had stepped in and guessed that he had also chosen melee magic. The lead boy smirked, saying this was good news. Now he could crush Seth at will. Seth stood firm. He calmly stated that he knew melee magic was considered weak, but since he had chosen it for himself, he would find a way to use it. He added that the outcome of a battle doesn't just depend on the magic a mage uses. The girl, worried about him, pleaded for him to stop, reminding him that they were upperclassmen and he could get hurt, but the boy attacked. He launched several fireballs at him, declaring it was already too late. Seth focused, using his physical momentum to concentrate his mana into his legs. He shot forward, dodging the fireballs with incredible speed. He thought to himself that this would be easy, but as he moved, he wondered what would happen if he tried something more. He noticed the boy was only using fireballs, which led him to believe that fire was the only element the boy could control. The boy yelled at him to shut up, angrily questioning how Seth was moving so fast. He swore he wouldn't be defeated by Seth. The boy, now furious, created an even bigger fireball with both hands, preparing to attack with all his might. Seth, however, summoned a sword from his mana and sliced through the fireball, leaving the spectator stunned. The wide-eyed girl asked if it was possible to cut a spell like that. Seth explained that a battle between mages ultimately came down to mana control. He remembered how, even without a vast mana reserve, his precision in mana control had made him one of the best. He felt that the spell had more versatility than he expected, and he wondered what would happen if he combined speed with power. The boy gritted his teeth and declared he would unleash an even more powerful blow. The heavy-set boy told him to stop, while the second boy warned that, if their leader kept this up, the instructor might intervene. The boy ignored them, telling them not to stop him. He began to chant, and as he did, Seth advanced, closing the distance in an instant. With a swift movement, he delivered a powerful mana punch to the boy, knocking him backward. The boy staggered, and Seth clenched his fist, thinking how useful it would be in close combat. One of the boys wondered if melee magic wasn't the weakest, and if the only difference was who was using it. How did he get so strong? Seth then asked for the brute strength back. The heavy-set boy reluctantly handed it over, deciding it was better not to escalate the fight any further. The 2 boys then helped their injured friend away. Seth returned the brute strength to the girl, telling her it was precious to her. She took his hand in gratitude, and introduced herself as Layla Roswell. She greeted him warmly and extended her hand for a handshake. He introduced himself as they shook hands. She nodded energetically, commenting that she knew he was famous and had an affinity for all paths of magic. So she asked why he chose melee magic. Setsuna thought for a moment, knowing she wouldn't believe him if he told the truth. Instead, he asked if she could tell him where their classroom was. Layla wondered if the new student orientation had already started. They both ran to the location, and Setsuna felt there was something unfair about it. After all, it was in the most remote part of the academy. As they ran, Layla asked if he could teach her the mana blade he had used earlier. Setsuna explained that he simply applied his magic control ability to the technique. He thought it should be possible to create various combat methods by applying this control in different ways, since magic disintegration didn't seem to affect this technique. Once he honed his skills in melee magic, he should be able to face the god of death. He also had another goal: to prepare for the inevitable invasion of the god of death. His thoughts returned to the past, to a time when he was having tea with the headmaster. The headmaster had taken off his gloves to reveal 2 advanced schools of magic. This shocked Setsuna. He discovered that the symbol on the headmaster's right hand represented summoning magic, but there was also a mysterious symbol on his left hand that Setsuna had never seen before. When Setsuna was about to ask about it, the headmaster replied that he would explain in due time. He said he was entrusting the secret to Setsuna, but Setsuna never got to learn the truth. The headmaster was assassinated shortly after the arrival of the god of death. The culprit was the god of death himself, who feared the headmaster's abilities. Setsuna believed that if he could uncover the secret of the second path of magic, it could give him the power to change the world's destiny. Layla led the way towards a building, saying they had arrived. Setsuna pondered how he could catch the headmaster's attention with his melee combat magic. The instructor was frustratingly critical, even though Setsuna wasn't late. However, showing up with a girl seemed to have made things worse. Just as Layla was about to explain the situation, the instructor cut her off, declaring that Setsuna's days of coasting on his good grades were over. Approaching, the instructor sneered, reminding Setsuna that he was part of the melee magic division, an outcast at the academy. Annoyed, Setsuna pushed the instructor's hand away, commenting on how irritating it was to listen to him. He questioned why a combat magic instructor would look down on the very path of magic he was supposed to teach. Enraged, the instructor grabbed Setsuna's collar, demanding to know how he dared to talk back. Setsuna remained unfazed, stating that combat magic had great potential, and that was precisely why he chose it. The instructor scoffed, asking how long Setsuna could keep up his arrogant act. Turning around, he issued a challenge. If Setsuna truly believed in combat magic, he had to prove it. Nearby, students were trying to break a large rock with their magic. One of the boys stumbled backward after striking it, realizing he hadn't even left a scratch. The instructor yelled at the class, asking what they were doing. This was their first test, to determine their skill level. He explained that inside each rock was a crystal the size of a fish, and their task was to extract it within the time limit. Failure would result in punishment. As the time drew to a close, none of the students had even made a scratch. One of them complained that the rocks were too hard, while a girl wondered how they were expected to succeed when they had just started learning. Another boy speculated that the instructor was taking out his frustration on them because he hadn't been promoted. The instructor then singled out Setsuna, leading him to the largest rock, and challenged him to demonstrate what combat magic was truly capable of. He gave him only 10 minutes. He was shocked, pointing out that the rock was even larger than the others, and that 10 minutes wouldn't be nearly enough. The instructor just gave a sarcastic smile and showed the stopwatch. Noting that a whole minute had already passed while they were talking, Setsuna stepped forward, placing his hand on the rock. The instructor scoffed, asking if he really believed he could do it mockingly. He offered extra time if Setsuna begged for forgiveness, but Setsuna simply stated that he would finish in 10 seconds. The instructor was surprised, and even Layla urged him not to be ridiculous. The instructor thought to himself that the rock was not only massive, but also incredibly dense. Even he would need at least 30 minutes just to make an impact. But Setsuna wasn't backing down. He had only 10 seconds with a determined look. He summoned a melee weapon into his hand if he wanted to catch the director's attention. He needed to become the top student in melee magic. Without hesitation, he slashed the rock. Knowing he couldn't waste time on trivialities after Setsuna struck the rock, nothing happened for a moment. The instructor Zakari shouted that he knew it. While Setsuna had potential, he was still just a student. Suddenly, the rock shattered into pieces. Setsuna handed the purple stone to the instructor, commenting that he was right about the 10 seconds. The instructor was stunned, and Layla couldn't believe it either. She wondered how Setsuna managed to extract the stone so easily. The other students were equally impressed, some speculating that Setsuna might be stronger than the instructor. The boy even questioned if Setsuna was more powerful than Zakari himself. However, the instructor rejected this idea, blaming Setsuna for using some kind of trick and claiming that 10 minutes wouldn't be enough to break such a dense rock. There was no way he could have done it fairly. Setsuna replied coldly, saying that If it took Zakari 10 minutes to do that, then maybe he should also attend classes with the other students. Zakari, visibly irritated by the comment, was about to retort when another teacher, Lionel, appeared holding Zakari by the collar. Lionel asked if he was bullying the students. Yawning, Lionel continued, saying that Zakari's antics had actually woken him up. He clarified that Setsuna hadn't cheated. Instead, he had sensed the flow of mana within the rock and struck its weakest point. Lionel reprimanded Zakari, asking how an instructor could be so ignorant of such basic concepts. Lionel turned to the students, announcing that Zakari would now demonstrate the mana guard, taking a battle stance. Lionel commented that since Zakari was so confident in his training, he was sure the demonstration wouldn't kill him. Zakari, now visibly worried, protested, but Lionel pushed him back, sending him flying into the building wall some distance away. Setsuna understood that Lionel had easily broken Zakari's mana barrier, realizing just how formidable Lionel was. Lionel then patted Setsuna's back, praising him for his impressive skill. He said that for melee magic, this is more than enough, and Setsuna doesn't need to push himself so hard. Setsuna replied firmly that he doesn't intend to lose to any other department, and that he will strive to be the best student and surpass everyone. Lionel laughed at Setsuna's determination. That's the spirit, he said, asking if there was any particular spell that Setsuna was interested in learning. If so, he would gladly teach it to him. Lionel then. He struggled with himself for having a mindset similar to a former student, reflecting that Setsuna could one day represent the department, but for now, he was a rival who could not be underestimated. Introducing himself, Leon declared that he was the head instructor of the melee magic department and welcomed everyone. Today, they were selecting their representative for the upcoming internal competition. Even though it was early, the internal competition was a contest between the 8 magic departments, each battling for honor. Each department would select its representative, and these chosen individuals would face off in a tournament format. Setsuna remembered that before traveling back in time, he had won the competition for the ranged magic department, earning the director's trust. This was the reason he wanted to become the representative again. However, Setsuna soon noticed a hardened rock nearby. Leon informed them that he hadn't just shown them the crystal, but that another student had extracted a similar one, using only his fist. Setsuna realized that both pieces of rock came from this student, Drago Kurde. Drago approached Setsuna, calling out and wondering why someone like him, a prodigy, had joined the melee magic department. Setsuna replied that there was a reason he needed to learn. Drago raised his voice, mocking the idea. He asked what Setsuna hoped to achieve with such a fragile body. Drago then revealed that his family had been studying. Hand-to-hand magic has been practiced for generations, and he had been under intense physical training for 17 years. Suddenly, he unleashed his power, making the ground tremble as he punched the air with such force that everyone could feel the pressure. With a smug expression, he got in Setsuna's face, challenging him to a duel. He declared that, if Setsuna wanted to become the representative, he would have to prove his strength and determination. Setsuna reminded Drago that the intramural contest was a test of skill, and as the only renowned student in the melee combat magic department, he was already a candidate. Setsuna agreed to the duel. Before things could escalate any further, Leon intervened, announcing that the duel would be scheduled for 1 week from that day. Drago, unsatisfied, warned Setsuna not to back down, telling him that if he called himself a combat mage, he should fight with honor. As Drago left, one of the boys wondered who would win the duel, while a girl expressed her confidence in Drago's victory. Layla, however, asked Setsuna if he was sure he could defeat Drago. Setsuna shook his head, thinking that Drago's powerful body, perfected through years of training, was too much for him to handle at the moment. Still, he left with the belief that there was a way. Layla, intrigued, curiously asked where he was going. She decided to follow him. They headed into the forest, stopping in front of a giant tree. Layla still didn't understand what was happening. Setsuna touched the tree, revealing that this was his secret training spot. Whenever he trained here, his strength increased threefold. She remarked that it was an incredible tree. Setsuna explained that it was the world tree, which had been rooted for thousands of years. The green light emitted by the tree enveloped Setsuna, accepting him as one of its own. As he was bathed in its glow, Layla grew curious about the light, and Setsuna explained that it was the blessing of the world tree, which had the effect of accelerated recovery for those accepted by it. He believed that he had found this place before traveling back in time. With the blessing of the world tree, he no longer needed to worry about running out of mana. He could enter different worlds and undergo training that pushed him to his physical limits. Layla was amazed, but she knew that Draco was a close combat mage from birth. She felt a strong desire to repay Setsuna for returning her brooch, so she decided to help him by spying on Draco. The scene shifted to the close combat magic training room, where some students including Draco, were training. Layla walked around, observing what Draco was doing. He was performing exercises with an immense amount of weight. After finishing, he asked Lionel if there were any fortified rocks left. Lionel asked if Draco planned to smash every single one of them. Draco replied that it wasn't about smashing them, he was just borrowing them. He placed a considerable amount of weight on his back and began doing push-ups. Layla watched in awe, wondering if Draco was even human. She questioned if he was really that strong and wondered if a single punch would be enough to challenge Setsuna. She researched whether Setsuna could defend himself against Draco. Meanwhile, Setsuna sat on a tree, reading a martial arts manual. Layla approached him, saying it was no time to sit and read. Draco was doing push-ups with 5 fortified rocks on his back. Setsuna agreed that Draco was incredible, but pointed out that such intensity was an appropriate level for physical training. He reassured her that there was no need to worry, it was part of his training. Her eyes widened with curiosity. She asked what he meant. Setsuna explained that it was a spell called Physical Builder, which strengthened the body and allowed for greater control over the nerves by channeling mana. By concentrating mana in their legs, they could increase their leg strength. In their fists, they would gain the greatest power in their strikes, and if focused on the brain, it would improve memory. He tossed the book aside and told her he had already memorized all the techniques, so he was eager to test them. He noticed a falling leaf and with a quick kick, used his power to slice it in half. He even created a sword-like force to cut the other leaves. Layla was amazed at how incredible it was, and how quickly he learned those moves. Setsuna commented that it was nowhere near enough, and suddenly felt a sharp pain, causing him to fall to his knees. A wound appeared on his hand. Layla wondered where the wound came from, but Setsuna reassured her that he was fine. Then, the green light of the world tree enveloped him, and he explained that with the physical enhancement, he was intentionally pushing his muscles to their limit. He could then focus on recovery, which would allow his body to grow stronger and heal faster. The wound healed before their eyes, and Layla asked if he really needed to go that far. Setsuna replied that he couldn't, possibly catch up to Draco with normal training methods, since Draco had spent much more time training than he had. With only 1 week before the duel, Setsuna was determined to repeat the process 1,000 times. Layla was surprised, and asked how he could endure such difficult training even once, let alone 1,000 times. Setsuna replied that it wasn't necessary to be perfect, but when he was training, he remembered the days when he couldn't even use magic. He dedicated himself to training every single day, even when he failed many times. He never gave up on himself, and continued to grow, improving little by little. He could endure it, because as long as he knew he was improving, it was bearable. Afterward, they both continued to train together, and during their breaks, Layla thought about him. People used to say he was born with talent, but in reality, he worked harder than anyone else. He was lifting an enormous amount of weight while doing push-ups. Finally, the day of the duel arrived. Setsuna stood on the battlefield against Drago with a large crowd watching. Drago commented that it was good that Setsuna hadn't run away to hide. Setsuna replied that he wouldn't do that, and that he really wanted to be the department representative. Layla asked if they were both ready, and as they stared each other down, he signaled the start of the duel. Setsuna immediately rushed to attack Drago. Setsuna threw a left hook at Drago, who blocked it using his hands as a barrier. Despite the defense, Drago was pushed back by the impact. Setsuna realized that Drago had used Mana Guard to block the attack. Drago quickly retaliated with a punch so powerful that its pressure could be felt by the audience, leaving them unable to even see the attack coming. Layla was worried about Setsuna as the smoke of battle began to clear. It was revealed that Setsuna had effortlessly dodged the punch. The students watching the duel were surprised and wondered if the two had really gone through the ritual of choice only 1 week ago. Setsuna told Drago that if the punch had landed squarely, he definitely would have taken some damage. Drago, clearly frustrated, threw a few more punches. Setsuna blocked and dodged them, which only irritated Drago further. Drago growled, asking if defense was all that Setsuna could do, taunting him for having such a weak body. Layla felt that the week of training hadn't been enough for Setsuna to defeat Drago. Lionel observed that it looked like Setsuna was losing the duel from the start. Drago launched another kick toward Setsuna, but Setsuna blocked it again. Lionel noted that Setsuna was likely using his mana control to deflect Drago's attacks. Drago, getting more irritated, said that elites like Setsuna always look down on close-quarters magic. He continued, saying that his family was belittled and humiliated simply because they were known for close-quarters magic. In a burst of rage, Drago conjured a sword, declaring that he would definitely defeat Setsuna. Setsuna responded by summoning his own sword, and the two rushed toward one another, their swords clashing in a powerful strike. Drago followed up with several rapid blows, but Setsuna skillfully leaped and dodged every single one. Finally, Setsuna delivered a strike of his own, but Drago leaped to attack again. Setsuna dodged, and the ground beneath them cracked from the force of their clash. As Drago charged forward again, Setsuna remembered the words of two boys, who criticized him for picking a fight with Drago and for choosing close-quarters magic. Setsuna then told Drago that he understood where he was coming from, but that he was aiming for something greater. Drago, confused, didn't understand what Setsuna meant by that. Setsuna broke through Drago's guard with a precise strike. Drago was momentarily stunned by the attack, but in the next instant, he slashed back, hitting Setsuna once more. Caning using a physical acceleration boost, Setsuna increased his speed and counterattacked. Layla noticed that Setsuna's attacks were starting to take a toll on Drago. Lionel thought Drago was performing admirably, but the mana manipulation and Setsuna's physical boosts were proving to be just as impressive. Lionel couldn't wait to see who would come out on top, knowing that to break through Drago's solid defense, Setsuna would need to create an opening. Setsuna rushed to attack Drago. Drago conjured another sword, attacking in a fit of rage. Realizing the danger, Setsuna quickly dodged the attack. Drago's strike hit the ground with immense force, shattering it. Seeing this, Drago smirked and confidently declared that Setsuna would not be able to escape with those legs. In a rage, he clenched his fists tightly, making Layla wonder what he was planning. Then Drago lunged forward and threw a punch at Setsuna. But when the punch connected, it was revealed to be nothing more than his afterimage. The real Setsuna was already in the sky above him. He explained that by concentrating mana on a specific point, it was possible to create an image, a residual image to fool his opponent. Without wasting another moment, Setsuna moved at incredible speed, while Drago prepared for another attack. Setsuna declared, "Let's finish this." With that, he unleashed a powerful strike on Drago. The audience was in shock, and Lionel wondered if Setsuna had capitalized on the momentum during the attack. Both of them were incredibly impressive. Lionel then announced that the match was over, and declared Setsuna the winner. As Drago lay on the ground from the final blow, Layla was beaming at this result. To everyone's surprise, Drago slowly rose to his feet. The audience was amazed, surprised that he could stand up. After such a devastating blow, it was clear how truly strong Drago was. However, Drago was furious with Setsuna, thinking that he had held back on the final attack to avoid a fatal wound. Setsuna extended a hand to help him up, but Drago was still seething with rage. He asked him what he was fighting for. Setsuna paused for a moment before answering, saying that he fought so he would not lose to anyone or anything, and that he would continue to grow stronger. Drago, recognizing his strength, said, "So that's why you're so strong." He then accepted his defeat. Setsuna replied that Drago had been a truly worthy opponent, and that he believed Drago would be a great help in the fight against the Death God. Lionel approached and told Setsuna that he must have been incredibly determined to take on Drago at such a close range. He then raised Setsuna's hand, declaring that based on the results of the match, Setsuna would be the representative of the melee magic department. A few days later, Lionel took Setsuna to a room, telling him that he was about to meet the representatives from the other departments. Lionel warned that he was the last person who should be giving Setsuna advice, but just to not cause any trouble. Setsuna assured him he wouldn't, then entered the room where 7 representatives were waiting. A boy with glasses looked at Setsuna and wondered aloud if the melee combat magic department would be participating that year too. He remarked on their shamelessness. Setsuna recognized the boy as Noel from the enhancement magic department. Noel approached, placing his leg over Setsuna's and pressing down on it. He taunted him, saying they would be rivals in the first match, and that in the last 100 years, no participant from melee magic had won the contest. He suggested that Setsuna should just sit in the corner and lift weights. Setsuna, unfazed, responded by moving his leg to press down on Noel's, commenting, "It seems the enhancement magic department has a unique way of greeting others. Is this how you do things here?" Noel got angry, but Setsuna calmly replied that he doesn't care about the last 100 years. "I'm going to be the champion this year." Noel, clearly frustrated, scoffed, and told him to keep dreaming. At that moment, the headmaster entered the room and smiled, commenting, "It's good to see you both so fired up, but save your energy for the real match." As he said this, all the representatives stood up to show respect for the headmaster. Setsuna reflected that the headmaster had appeared at this very moment, just as he had in his past life. The headmaster stood before them, and a pink-haired lady greeted him warmly, saying she would do her best to make the headmaster proud. During the internal competition, Setsuna recognized her as Kero from the summoning magic department. She was high-spirited and had proven to be a formidable opponent during the internal competition he participated in his past life. Although he had held back at that time, it didn't mean he should underestimate her now. The headmaster began by congratulating everyone for being chosen as representatives of their respective magic departments. He expressed his happiness at seeing the 8 talented students gathered in one room. Then he informed them that the matchups for the competition between the walls had been randomly determined and would take place one by one in a tournament format. The first match would be between the representatives of close combat magic and enhancement magic. The second match would feature the representatives of healing magic and resurrection magic. The third match would pit the representatives of formation magic and summoning magic against each other. Finally, the last match would involve the representatives of irregular magic and alchemy magic. The headmaster also mentioned that the competition was an opportunity for them to experience different magical specializations firsthand. The matches would take place in 10 days, giving them time to train and rest. He eagerly awaited to see their battles. All the students bowed in agreement. As they did so, Seth felt that this could be his chance to speak with the headmaster. As the headmaster began to leave, Seth called out to him. The headmaster recognized him as the representative of the close combat magic department. Seth introduced himself and asked if he could make a request. If he won the competition, would he be allowed to learn about the headmaster's magic? The surprised headmaster replied that since Seth was a close combat magic student and he himself was a summoner, he didn't think his magic would be very useful to him. But Seth clarified that he was interested in learning about his second specialization. The headmaster's expression changed, and he became visibly irritated. He grumbled and asked where he had heard about that. Seth's demonstration of formidable power was evident and seemed somewhat suspicious. However, if he was to find a way to defeat the God of Death, he couldn't afford to back down. At this moment, he couldn't quite explain why. But if the close combat magic department won the competition, for the first time in a century, it would change how the world viewed them. What he was asking for in return wasn't much. The headmaster replied that it didn't seem like Seth had any hidden motives, so he agreed to let him test his skills if he won the competition. Seth bowed to thank him. The headmaster warned him, however, that it wouldn't be easy by any means. Seth replied with determination, expressing his intention to win the competition and receive the headmaster's teachings. The headmaster walked away, appreciating Seth's spirit. Later that night, Seth sat alone outside, eating something delicious, and reflecting on his 10 years at the academy. He realized there hadn't been much to do in his free time during those years. He decided to thank Lila for recommending the meal. Determined to prepare as best he could in the 10 days before the competition, he focused on his goal. Suddenly, someone told him there was no need to worry about preparations. Just before a giant fist came flying in his direction, he blocked the attack with his hand and quickly created distance, only to realize it was a golem. Noel was behind it all, watching from a hidden spot. He remarked that it wasn't too bad, but he had used Seth's blind spot to his advantage. Seth understood that the golem was created by Noel, who used his power to turn life into stone. He asked what Noel intended to do next. Noel replied that they should finish what they started earlier and not wait for the official match. Against a combat mage, he summoned several golems to attack from behind and declared that Seth must pay the price for humiliating him. Seth calmly replied that Noel brought this upon himself. When the sound of the bells rang, Noel decided to stop, saying it wouldn't look good for others to see him cornering a weak and defenseless opponent. He dismissed the golems and left, threatening to crush Seth even more completely in the next match. Seth realized that Noel was very talented, controlling multiple golems at once. However, his attention was drawn to the bread that had fallen during the confrontation, knowing that now he couldn't enjoy it. The next day, in the melee magic department, Lionel addressed the students. He said that before the internal competition, he would analyze the battle between Drago and Seth. He then asked both if they had identified their flaws. Both nodded their heads. Lionel asked Drago to go first. Drago replied that his control over both his mana and his emotions was unstable. When Lionel turned to Seth, Seth replied that his physical strength was lacking, and in terms of strength, Drago had surpassed him. Lionel appreciated their honesty and reminded them that growth was impossible without facing their weaknesses. He encouraged them to focus on these shortcomings during the next match. Layla raised her hand and asked the professor if the match would also serve as a form of training for the internal tournament. Lionel smiled and replied that it was a good question. He mentioned that Seth's first match would be against the enhancement magic department. According to Seth, Noel's ability was in commanding a large number of golems, and since the golems had physical forms, fighting against them wouldn't be much different from facing a melee combat mage. Lionel gave instructions to both students. He told Drago to focus on his speed, because in the next match, he would attack Seth from various directions to simulate a group of golems. As for Seth, he was to block Drago's attacks and practice counterattacks. Drago got ready, and said it wouldn't be like last time. Seth replied that he hoped for the same. Drago lunged forward to punch Seth, but he dodged the attack. Drago wondered if Seth thought he would attack from the right, but before he could react, Seth was hit by Drago's other hand. Seth realized he was a bit too slow. Lionel praised Drago, observing that he had achieved a good balance between speed and power. Drago was also praised for his defense, and Lionel instructed him to use his footwork to neutralize Seth's movements. Seth agreed and backed away, preparing to punch Drago. After some time, both were lying on the ground, exhausted. Drago thanked Seth for the match. Lionel approached them and said that their movements were good. He believed that in a few days, they would be able to handle golems without any problem. He handed them water bottles, and Seth, taking one, said he wouldn't let his guard down. Lionel observed, noting that Drago had a solid foundation, Seth had exceptional instincts, and both were improving rapidly. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The crowd was buzzing with excitement, and the announcer proclaimed that this was the 780th annual Roll and Trains competition. 28 students representing the Academy's departments. Who will reign supreme? Both Seth and Noel stood face to face, ready for the match. The announcer addressed the crowd, saying they could place bets on the competitors. The majority of the audience was betting on Noel, and they wondered who would bet on the melee mage. A boy who had been defeated by Seth approached him and said he had to win the battle and show everyone who was really in charge. Meanwhile, the crowd noticed Akhtar from the ranged magic department arriving, looking completely at ease despite his upcoming fight. It became clear that the winner of this match would face Akhtar next. The announcer then announced that the stage would change randomly for each match, and for this one, the stage would be a desert. Noel provoked Zane, saying that it seems luck isn't on his side either. Some kids in the audience cheered for Noel, convinced that Zane, being from the melee magic department, would be easy to beat. Another boy expressed how great it was to face the weakest department in the academy. Layla, hearing the comments, shouted for them to be quiet. She promised they would see if they still thought the combat department, melee, was the weakest after the match. As she furiously advanced towards them, Lionel intervened to calm her down. Finally, the host announced for the match to begin. Noel picked up a stone and asked Zane if he knew what it was. Zane wondered if it was a piece of reinforced rock. Noel confirmed, saying, but more precisely, when combined with sand it creates golems. As if on cue, a golem made of reinforced rock appeared immune to blades. Noel then showed a bag full of the same stones, and scattered them across the area while several golems emerged. Noel told Zane, let's see how long you can last. Layla, watching in shock, couldn't believe how many golems Noel had summoned. Noel arrogantly explained that in the desert he could create as many golems as he wanted, and that Zane wouldn't even come close to matching him with melee combat magic. A boy in the audience said it was obvious what the outcome of the fight would be, while the other boy next to him mocked Zane. Noel then addressed Zane, asking if he had any last words. Zane replied that it was disappointing. He thought Noel would be better than this. Noel, surprised by his response, was momentarily stunned, before sending the golems to attack. As the golems advanced, a cloud of dust filled the air, and Noel said with a smile that this was the price he paid for daring to provoke him. The audience, unable to see through the dust, wondered what was happening. They couldn't make out anything on the ground due to the swirling sand. On the ground, Zane concentrated his mana, and began to take down the golems one by one. He had learned how to destroy these things, he muttered. The audience was shocked, and even Noel seemed impressed by the display. Noel quickly created more golems, and sent them running towards Zane. Zane, however, remained calm as he approached Noel, and in close quarters combat. No other school of magic can beat melee, he said, and in other words, golems with their predictable movements are no match for me. He cut down the golems again, causing Noel to panic. Noel shouted that he could make more and that Zane didn't need to be so cocky, but Zane continued his advance, finally reaching Noel. It seems luck wasn't on your side, he said, delivering a punch that sent Noel flying backward. The boy in the audience wondered what just happened, while the woman next to him couldn't see anything due to the dust. The audience stared at the ground, trying to understand the progress of the match and determine the winner. When the dust settled, they saw that the winner was Zane. Zane, breathing heavily, thought that he managed to win the first match easily. Layla, full of joy, cheered for him. A boy talking with his friends asked if he heard correctly. The melee mage actually won after all these years? One of the students suggested that maybe Noel ran out of mana from summoning so many golems. Several students speculated about what had happened, wondering how Zane managed to win. Silas didn't look happy, and said that Noel didn't lose because he made a mistake, but because Setsuna was simply more skilled than him. The student next to him commented that the battle with a close combat magic representative was more interesting than expected, but suggested that safety measures should have been taken. The second battle began, and was intense. After watching the match, Setsuna approached Lila, and she praised him, asking if he was going to watch the next match. He replied that he was, explaining that it would help him prepare for the battles to come. He knew that the second match was between the representatives of summoning magic and formation magic. The announcer declared that the summoning magic representative, Carol, had the advantage, while the formation magic representative kept trying to close the distance with his opponent. Watching the battle, Setsuna thought that, although the formation magic representative was losing, his movements were impressive and might be worth trying in a battle against close combat magic. Layla commented that although the magic being used looked flashy and cool, she still wanted to get stronger, using close combat magic. Setsuna then asked why she chose close combat magic, since she must have potential in other schools of magic as well. Layla then shared a childhood incident, explaining that, when she was playing with her little brother, they were attacked by a bear. At that moment, she thought that they were lost, but a combat mage came to the rescue. She found the mage so cool and strong, and so she decided she wanted to be like him, to become strong enough to help others in need. She admitted that it sounded childish, and was a little embarrassed. Setsuna reassured her, saying that it's not childish at all. People can become infinitely stronger when they have one goal in mind. Layla asked if he really believed that, to which he nodded. At that moment, Leo came to find Setsuna. Setsuna thought that Leo was the most skilled student in the ranged magic department, surpassed only by himself. Leo praised Setsuna for his match, acknowledging that even though he was from the close combat magic department, Setsuna's power was impressive. He then asked who the girl sitting next to Setsuna was. Leo paused as if certain of his words and asked if they were an item. Setsuna was confused by Leo's question. Layla quickly replied, saying that it wasn't what they thought, and stood up to leave as she walked away. She wondered if Leo was Setsuna's friend, and suggested they sit together and enjoy the rest of the matches. Setsuna was left wondering what had just happened. With her reaction, Leo sat down next to Setsuna, and Setsuna asked why Actor had become the magic representative of the ranged attack department instead of him. Setsuna expressed surprise, as Leo was clearly very skilled. Leo's mood shifted, and he became a bit sad. He explained that it wasn't an excuse, but Actor was incredibly sneaky. Leo confided that Actor had tricked him into stepping down and taking the role of the department's representative. Leo told Setsuna to be cautious and not let his guard down when dealing with Actor. Setsuna surmised that Actor was the type who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, so he would have to be careful when facing him. The scene then shifted to Actor, who was staring at a box of flowers with a strange smile on his face during the tournament. The announcer declared that the first fight of the long-awaited second round of the intramural contest would be between arranged marriage. And on this stage, the moment a competitor falls, they will not only lose the match, but also face a punitive scoring system. Drago sat beside Lionel, mentioning it would be difficult for him to even get close to Hector. Lionel commented that Drago would also be at a disadvantage in this match. Hector, seated with Silas, remarked on the impressive stage he had prepared for the match as expected of the head of the long-range magic department. Silas added that he would make Kale regret his decision bitterly, and realize how foolish it was to choose close-quarters magic. Hector replied that regret would only be possible if KL could at least start the match. The announcer declared it was almost time to begin. The scene then shifted to 10 minutes earlier. In the participants' waiting room, Layla knocked on the door before entering and asked how Kyle was feeling, worried about his well-being. He replied that he was fine as always, and then asked her to look at the vase in front of him. As she did, he explained that it was a magical artifact, activated by touch. The moment she came into contact with it, it would absorb a large amount of her mana. Shocked, she wondered why such a dangerous object had been placed there. He told her it was to incapacitate him before the match, marking the 7th attempt on his life. She asked if he was hurt, to which he reassured her not to worry, as he had already handled everything. He knew this was Hector's doing, who had been meticulous, leaving no trails that could point back to him. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. 3 children entered holding a bouquet and asking Layla to give it to Kale. Layla wondered what the children were doing there. A boy explained they had been sent by a man to deliver it to him. When they looked around, they realized no one was there. Layla thought it would have been better if Kale had received the bouquet personally. The boy mentioned that the person who asked them to deliver it was quite insistent. When one of the children holding the bouquet started to feel dizzy and dropped it, Kale noticed marks on her neck that reminded him of something he had seen during the war. He immediately kicked the bouquet away. Alarmed, Layla asked what was wrong. Kale explained that the flowers were from a poisonous plant called vanium, The children's condition didn't look good, and Kale was filled with rage. He muttered to himself, furious about how far some people would go to manipulate relationships. He knew that if the children weren't treated immediately, they wouldn't survive. But he also understood that only a healing mage could properly identify and treat the poison. Lila, equally concerned, said their lives were in danger. Kale left quickly, telling her to stay away from the children as well, since being too close could expose her to the poison. Layla assured him she would be fine, then took out a brooch, asking him to trust her. Kale realized it was a magical artifact, capable of containing mana. Lila explained that her mother had infused healing spells into the brooch, for emergencies like this. She tried to heal the children, and Kale noticed the marks on their skin were slowly fading. Layla mentioned that her mother gave her the brooch for emergencies, though she never imagined it would be used in such a situation. Kale felt grateful for her help, then used his powers to move the bouquet, poisoned away, promising to handle the rest. He knew that Vanium emitted the most poison when it bloomed, and it had to be dealt with before the situation worsened. However, if he tried to get rid of it in front of a large crowd, the poison would spread, putting everyone around in danger. The poison was also affecting him, so he threw the bouquet toward the world tree. Hoping it would be destroyed there with a wave of power, he struck it, cutting the toxic plant and sending it to the sky. Far from the arena, as he watched it burn, he felt the poison begin to dissipate, and his strength was returning. While in the arena, a crowd gossiped about Seth's absence. Some even assumed that he had dropped out from fear. An announcer checking the time declared that Seth would be disqualified right when he was about to announce Arthur as the winner. Seth appeared, interrupting and declaring that the fight was far from over. Arthur gave him a strange smile. Upon seeing Seth's arrival, Arthur seemed pleased with the gift he had prepared, to congratulate Seth on winning the first round, stating that it was exactly to his liking. However, pointed out that Arthur was using dishonest tactics. He not only sent poison to him, but also involved innocent children in the plan. Arthur feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea what Seth was talking about. Seth clenched his fists. Arthur continued, stating that there was no need to get so upset over something so trivial. In fact, the children would be proud to know that they played a role in Arthur's victory. This only fueled Seth's rage even more. The announcer then called for the start of the match. Arthur attacked immediately, using mutilated star magic, but Seth skillfully dodged it. Drago, watching from the side, wondered if something had happened to Seth. On the way to the arena, as his humans seemed to be in disarray, Seth realized that the world tree had purified his body of the powerful poison for the most part, but the residual poison was still preventing his body from functioning properly. A series of attacks came his way, but Seth jumped and dodged them all. Arthur, clearly just getting started, mocked him, claiming that the representative of the melee combat magic department only knew how to defend himself properly. Silas, watching from the sidelines, whispered to himself that it was a good thing he had arranged everything in Arthur's favor. Even if Seth tried his best, he wouldn't be able to win this match. Seth noticed that Layla hadn't arrived yet, and wondered if the children were all right. Arthur mocked him, saying he couldn't focus on the battle at hand, and suggested that Seth seemed to be getting tired. A boy in the audience commented that running away seemed to be the only thing the representatives of magic melee combat could do. Another boy next to him wondered what hope Seth had of defeating ranged magic. Arthur attacked again, boasting that he was ready to finish this. Seth, determined to block the attack with his barrier of mana, prepared himself, but as soon as he tried to activate it, his mana barrier failed, and he was severely injured. Arthur laughed, mocking Seth's pitiful condition, and calling it a sorry sight. Struggling to get up, asked Arthur why he had stopped. He questioned when the magic department of ranged magic had ever shown such weakness, asking why Arthur wasn't pushing to his limits and defeating him completely. Instead, Arthur was just talking non-stop. Seth, despite his injuries, was trying to understand what Arthur really intended. Arthur smiled, realizing that Seth was analyzing his every move. Even while defending against his attacks, he found Setsuna interesting and urged him to look around. When Setsuna looked, he saw that he was surrounded, trapped on a small patch of land with lava flowing around him. A boy in the audience shouted that Setsuna was completely trapped. Hector declared that he sought perfection, and that Setsuna had acted exactly as he intended. He prepared to use his storm cannon, saying that now it was all over. At that moment, Layla entered the arena and called out to Setsuna. She told him that the children were now safe. Setsuna smiled in relief and replied that now he could fight with everything he had. Finally, the preparations were complete. Suddenly, Hector noticed a surge of mana coming from Setsuna and was confused as to how he had managed to gather so much mana. Setsuna explained that he had been using physical exertion to activate his cells and detoxify his blood. While Hector was foolishly toying with him, he added that Hector had only dug his own grave. Enraged, Hector retorted that Setsuna was in terrible shape. Silas, watching from the sidelines, urged Hector to finish him off, insisting that Setsuna was just bluffing. Hector launched his attack. But Setsuna knew he was almost out of mana. He had only one more strike left. Gathering his last strength, he deflected Hector's attack with his sword. The sudden move shocked both Drago and Hector. The attack redirected by Setsuna was now heading straight for Hector. He nullified his magic and taunted Setsuna, asking if he really thought Hector would just stand there and let him land a blow. Hector declared that he wasn't the one who would be buried today, but Setsuna. However, when Hector looked around, he realized that Setsuna had already closed the distance between them. Sword in hand, Setsuna smiled and told Hector that he was the one who had underestimated him. Terrified, Hector begged for mercy, apologizing profusely. But Setsuna struck him brutally with his sword, knocking him to the ground. Setsuna coldly stated that it was the children Hector should be apologizing to, not to him. The host announced Setsuna as the winner of the fight. However, just as everyone began to applaud, the ground beneath them suddenly began to move and slide away. Both Setsuna and Hector were on the verge of falling, and the crowd gasped in shock. As they were falling, Setsuna realized that Hector was already unconscious, and at the speed they were going, he would be in real danger. Using his powers, Setsuna regained his balance and managed to grab Hector before he fell further. He wondered if he had been too late. At that moment, Carol appeared and called Fenrir, her summoned beast, to save them. Setsuna recognized it as Carol's summoning magic. The audience cheered as Fenrir appeared to rescue them. Carol praised Fenrir and with a smile, turned to Setsuna, hoping he didn't mind her intervention. Setsuna thanked her for the help, thinking that Carol was undoubtedly a favorite to win the training competition. She was a formidable opponent, and he knew he would need to prepare thoroughly for the approaching battle. The audience was still in shock over Setsuna's victory. A boy commented that it couldn't have been pure luck, while a girl noted that the outcome was completely unpredictable. The director was also watching the match. Silas, furious with Hector, called him a useless fool, and promised that Setsuna would regret this. When Setsuna rejoined Lila, Drago, and Lionel, Lila expressed her gratitude to him. Drago, who had heard about everything that had happened, also praised Setsuna. Setsuna asked about the children and Lila reassured him, saying they were resting in the infirmary and would soon make a full recovery. Seth was relieved to learn the children were okay, since he had been so worried about them. He felt a strange sensation and turned to check. Layla asked what was wrong, but he replied that it was nothing. He had just felt a brief moment of intense bloodlust emanating from somewhere and wondered what was happening at the academy. Later that night, Seth was standing among some rocks in the forest, thinking that he only had 1 week before the final match. He also remembered the terrifying magic that he felt during the tournament, and he knew he needed to get even stronger. At that moment, Lionel appeared, asking why Seth had asked to meet him in such a secluded place. Seth replied that there was one spell he was very interested in learning from Lionel, the Comet Fist. Lionel laughed, saying that's what people used to call him, and asked where. Seth had heard about it. Seth clenched his fists, realizing that this was the legendary name he had heard during his time in the Labyrinth Army before returning to the past. The Comet Fist was the name of a close combat mage who had single-handedly defeated a fearsome dragon with a single blow. However, by the time he joined the army, the mage had already disappeared. It was just an educated guess, but Seth was now certain that the department head was indeed Lionel. With determination, Seth bowed towards him, ready to learn his magic. Lionel explained that the Comet Fist was an ancient technique. Seth replied that it didn't matter to him. Lionel was the strongest close combat mage he had ever seen. Lionel wondered why Seth was so desperate to become stronger. From what Lionel could tell, Seth was already more than capable. Seth replied that it wasn't enough. He refused to lose to anyone again, even if the opponent was invincible. Lionel laughed, calling Seth an interesting kid. He agreed to teach him, but also warned that it wasn't a technique that any student should learn so early. Lionel began to gather mana in his hand, and Seth could feel an incredible amount of energy being concentrated. Lionel explained that the technique he was about to demonstrate was called the Comet Fist. He hadn't used it more than 2 times, as it consumed a tremendous amount of mana, but 1 punch was all he needed. He told Seth to watch carefully. With a single punch to the ground, Lionel released so much pressure that the surrounding area was destroyed, sending debris flying in all directions. Seth was amazed, commenting that it was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Lionel explained that the technique required concentrating a huge amount of mana into a single point, making it difficult to use in one-on-one battles like in tournaments. He asked Seth if he still wanted to learn it. Seth eagerly replied that he was looking forward to it. Lionel agreed to start teaching him and told him to follow him. The scene then changed to Carol, who was having tea with a man who congratulated her on advancing to the final round. She thanked him, and he asked if she was confident that she could defeat the representative from the close combat magic department. Carol smiled, not taking him very seriously, and replied that no one knew what the outcome would be, but she was planning to do her best. When the man finished his tea, Carol offered to make another cup. As she stood up to leave and get it, the man discreetly took out a card and used it on her. He made an emblem appear on the back of her neck, and she collapsed. The man smiled, thinking it would be ideal if Carol could defeat Seth. However, if things didn't work out that way, he would simply deal with both of them. Seth continued to train, wondering if he was ready. Lionel was shocked that Setsuna had perfected it in just 1 week. He thought it would take years to master. Lionel then told Setsuna that he had passed, marking the end of the charge bullet lessons. It was the day of the final match, and the audience had gathered in the arena. The host announced that the final match of the 781st intramural competition of the Ellen Reed Academy of Magic had arrived. The first competitor was Carol, fresh from her consecutive victories from the summoning magic department. Her opponent was the one who shook up the competition that year, Setsuna, from the melee magic department. The students were debating who would win, but one boy was confident that Carol would triumph, as she had dominated every match so far. A girl mentioned that Setsuna was also strong, and after watching his last match, she was totally rooting for him. 3 young children were also cheering for Setsuna. The match would take place in the goddess ruins, and in anticipation of the battle's intense ferocity, a formation mage created a powerful barrier around the stage. Layla watched this with Lionel and commented that it was a fair fight. Lionel was also curious about the match, and Setsuna, looking at the headmaster, thought that he had to fulfill his promise to teach him the second magic specialization. Carol stated that it seemed Setsuna had prepared very well for this match. She planned to summon Fenrir and challenge Setsuna to give it his all. The announcer declared the start of the long-awaited final match. Carol summoned Fenrir and mounted him, preparing to attack Setsuna. Setsuna dodged an attack, wondering if Fenrir's attack was a glacial bomb of swirling snow. Carol commented that although he was fast, he wouldn't be able to keep his guard up forever and would come to regret it. Fenrir attacked again, and Setsuna activated his physical amplifier, increasing his speed by 10 times. With his newfound speed, he dodged the attacks and closed in dangerously, preparing to strike Fenrir. Layla was pleased that it worked. However, Lionel wasn't so sure, observing that Fenrir was just 1 cluster of mana and would quickly recover from any injury. Carol told Setsuna that his effort was not bad at all, but now she would use Fenrir's power to freeze the ground. Setsuna was shocked to see the entire stage freezing over. He realized the mana-generated cold couldn't pass through the barrier. A man watching from the side stood on the frozen field, thinking that Fenrir's attacks would become much stronger now. He wondered what Setsuna would do next, his eyes gleaming with fiery determination. Setsuna realized that normal attacks would not be effective at all, and the longer he prolonged the battle, the greater his disadvantage would be. He decided to use the destroyed objects on the ground to jump and dodge, planning to bet on his charged bullets. He formed a sword from his mana, and prepared himself as Fenrir's attack struck the rock he was standing on. A boy, watching the fight, guessed that Setsuna wasn't attacking at all, but just defending himself. Another boy speculated that Setsuna was no match for her summoning magic. The 3 children watching also seemed worried about Setsuna, while Lionel observed the battle. Layla called out to him, asking what was wrong. He replied that it was nothing, but he thought that since the charged bullet could only be used once, after enough mana had been concentrated, it was a difficult technique to use in a one-on-one battle. But with Setsuna's precise control, he was concentrating to gather it in his fist, although it wasn't easy. Carol, meanwhile, thought that she didn't know what Setsuna was planning, but she couldn't just stand by and watch. She summoned Garuda, a bird familiar, alongside Fenrir. Drago was surprised that Carol had summoned 2 familiars at the same time. Lionel commented that it was an incredible talent. Both familiars attacked Setsuna simultaneously, and Lila looked worried for him, but Seth managed to push them both back with each hand, forcing them to retreat. He then calmly told Carol that he knew she would play her trump card. Surprised that he had blocked her attack, Carol wondered how he had done it. Seth, without preparing to counterattack, noticed a strange man watching from a distance. The man suddenly snapped his fingers, and Carol shuddered in pain, surrounded by a dark aura. Seth watched in alarm, wondering if this was the magic of the death god. Seth felt certain that this was indeed the magic of the death god, but he couldn't understand how it was possible. Carol was faltering, then suddenly screamed, releasing a dark power, which caused several dark monsters to appear and attack Seth. The audience was bewildered, wondering how many familiars Carol had. Agniel realized that this wasn't Carol's magic, and shouted for the fight to be stopped. demanding the barrier be dissolved, and questioning what the formation mage was doing. The man responsible for the dark magic explained that only the person who cast the barrier could remove it. Everyone should be looking for the formation mage, but he was already in the villain's clutches. As the monsters continued to attack Seth, he thought to himself that the person responsible for all this must be nearby. Seth activated his mana detection to locate the source, the man. However, the man suggested that Seth focus on the battle at hand. He ordered Garuda to attack Seth, striking him with a staff and forcing him back. Layla was beside herself with worry as Seth struggled to get up. The man boasted that not even Seth would be able to find him in the middle of the crowd, and in his current state, Seth wouldn't be able to do anything. Agniel felt a growing sense of urgency. There wasn't enough time for Seth to prepare another charged bullet, and Carol's physical condition was deteriorating. If they didn't act quickly, she would lose control of her magic, putting her life at risk. He realized someone out there was controlling things, from the shadows. Carol kept trying to break free, telling Seth to run away as the dark monsters closed in. He dodged her attacks while heading toward her, fending off the monsters as he advanced. When he confronted a horned monster, he grabbed its horns and threw the creature over the others. The headmaster watched the battle unfold, and Agniel rushed up the stairs, thinking that at this rate, Seth would be in grave danger. He knew he needed to find the formation mage who had cast the barrier and hoped Seth could hold on a little longer. Another monster with a long, sharp horn charged at Seth, piercing his leg. Lila grew worried seeing the injury, and other students expressed their concern, knowing that Seth was pushing himself too hard. The man behind the dark magic declared that it was over, and he ordered the monsters to finish Seth. They lunged at him, and Femur bit down on Seth's hand, causing excruciating pain. Seth screamed in agony, his voice echoing throughout the arena. Seth then remembered Lionel telling all the students what the most important thing in close-quarters combat magic was. Drago had answered that it was the power to take down the enemy in a single blow. Seth continued, explaining that it was about closing in on the enemy while minimizing damage. Lionel then added that the key was not to let any attack shake them, staying strong and focused, enough to deliver the final blow. He instructed them that they would now begin training to defend against damage. Seth snapped back to the present, realizing the defense had been successful. The man watching the battle thought that Seth's arm had been destroyed, and wondered if he had done it intentionally to focus his mana. Seth knew that the familiars were in an extremely agitated state, so any moment of weakness would make them pounce on him, seeing him as prey. He shouted that he would end it with a single punch, and then launched a charged projectile attack, defeating all the familiars at once. After the battle, Carol was on the verge of collapsing, and Setsuna rushed to her side, confirming she was all right before gently laying her on the ground. The audience could hardly believe what they had just witnessed, wondering if Carol had finally fainted. The announcer declared that Setsuna was the winner, marking the first time in 100 years that a head of the melee magic department had claimed victory. The students erupted in applause, with one of them commenting on the final technique Setsuna had used. It was a move they had never seen before. Layla and Drago were overjoyed with Setsuna's victory. The boy whom Setsuna had saved, the one who had previously lost to him, said he had expected this outcome and had bet on Setsuna. The boy next to him asked how much he had won. The man replied that he didn't actually think Setsuna would win, but he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Before anything else, he needed to get rid of the formation mage. The man then noticed something unusual, and wondered if someone was drawing attention to the formation mage. He then used some kind of magic to place a symbol on the formation mage's back. Meanwhile, Layla was heading to the area when she felt a strange magical presence. When she arrived, she found the formation mage lying on the ground. Layla wondered if she had missed something important. Finally, the barrier began to fade. The headmaster descended into the arena, commenting that it was no surprise Carol had collapsed after summoning so many familiars. Setsuna was convinced that someone was secretly controlling her. The headmaster examined her and determined it was the work of a magical artifact. He assured everyone to leave the rest to him. As the headmaster worked to heal Carol, he turned to Setsuna and praised him for demonstrating his strength. He promised he would keep his word, and Setsuna thanked him in response. The headmaster then left, telling Setsuna to meet him in his office the next day. Setsuna went to the infirmary, where a woman was healing his wounds. As she tended to his injuries, she told him they weren't fully healed yet, so he should take it easy for a while. He thanked her and changed his clothes. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. When Setsuna invited them in, it was Lionel, accompanied by Drago, Lila, and the 3 young children. Layla immediately asked how Setsuna was doing. He assured her he was fine and proved it by moving his hand, showing he had fully recovered. Layla smiled with relief and congratulated him again on his victory. Drago, beaming with pride, also congratulated Setsuna. saying he was the pride and joy of the melee magic department. The three children, still buzzing with excitement, told Setsuna they loved watching him fight earlier and that he was so cool. After the greetings, the others began to leave, leaving only Lionel with Setsuna. Lionel informed him that the formation mage was now okay, and had regained consciousness. Lionel continued, explaining that Carol wasn't doing well, but at least she was out of immediate danger for now. Once she fully recovered, they could learn more about what had happened. Most importantly, however, it was clear that someone had deliberately tried to harm Setsuna during the match. Lionel asked if Setsuna had any idea who the culprit might be. The scene then shifted to night, as a shadowy figure approached a room, attempting to open the door. However, they quickly realized a barrier had been erected to keep out intruders. However, it was useless against him. He simply shattered it with his power and entered the room. It was where Carol lay unconscious. The man muttered to himself that it would be best to get rid of her. Before dealing with Setsuna, he couldn't allow anyone who knew about him to stay alive. As he launched an attack toward Carol, a blade cut through the attack, stopping it. Setsuna stood in front of Carol, his eyes sharp with determination. He said he knew the culprit would come for her, but truly hoped it wasn't Leo. Leo mentioned that Setsuna had finally realized what was going on, but Setsuna couldn't find any evidence pointing to Leo. Setsuna mentioned that he had a hunch, but wasn't certain until that very moment. He suggested that since it had come to this, they should take it outside for a while. Both started walking out, and Setsuna, he knew he wasn't completely healed yet. If he fought in his current condition, it would be disastrous. Leo told him to stop frowning, and wondered when Setsuna started to suspect him. Setsuna replied that Leo had suddenly disappeared after the selection ritual, which he found unusual. It also seemed strange that Leo wasn't chosen as the representative for the long-range magic department, and no matter what deceptive means Akishara might have used, Setsuna wouldn't have been so easily tricked. Leo guessed that he should have been the representative of the department. After all, Setsuna continued, explaining that when he saw Leo that night, his suspicions were confirmed. Just as Setsuna felt during the final match of the intramural competition, he sensed the power of the death god inside Leo. Leo wondered about the death god, and then drew closer with different auras surrounding him. Red lines appeared on his face, as he asked what Setsuna knew about the death god. Setsuna read the magic and noticed that Leo's presence had changed. He realized that Leo was probably the death god's minion. If that was the case, Setsuna had to stop him at all costs. Leo asked if they could just drop the friendship charade. Right then and there, he said he wanted to have some fun with Setsuna, even though it would be a terrible experience for Setsuna. With a mana sword in hand, Setsuna rushed to attack Leo, but Leo easily sliced his sword in half. It seemed like a repeat of something Setsuna had experienced in the past. Leo mentioned that he had gained the trust of the death god, and was granted the magic of disintegration. One of his many powers. No matter what magic Setsuna used, he wouldn't be able to touch him. Setsuna tried again, but once more Leo easily parried his attack. He thought that he couldn't simply give up. Leo seemed to only use disintegration magic when Setsuna attacked, so he had to move so quickly that he would catch Setsuna by surprise. He was about to attack Leo from behind, but once again his attack was blocked. Leo smiled and said it was useless since his perception was sharper than Setsuna's. Determined, Setsuna conjured a fireball and said it would have been more fun if he hadn't been injured. Despite the pain, Setsuna managed to steady himself. Leo commented that Setsuna was still a pretty tough opponent lasting this long with only melee. He added that Setsuna would have been much stronger if he had been chosen for the long-range magic department. He then acted strangely, asking what could he do, as if it were his choice. He said, "Let's finish this now." Leo attacked with an electric spike, aiming for Setsuna's leg. The pain was excruciating, and Setsuna realized that his wound from the final match had not yet fully healed. He winced in pain and asked Leo why he was doing this. Leo replied that there was no specific reason. He was simply tired of the world. It was like destroying a sandcastle someone had built. Setsuna wondered why Leo was doing such things. This reminded him of the past, and he shouted that Leo had hurt and killed people for such trivial reasons. He even questioned if this was really Leo. Leo told him to shut up, as Leo was about to attack again. Setsuna realized his mana blade wouldn't be enough. He needed an attack powerful enough to overwhelm Leo in a single blow. He remembered his fight with Discord and reminded himself that he couldn't give up yet. Setsuna prepared to strike Leo, but Leo smiled and said, "It's too late." Leo launched his own attack, and Setsuna felt the power of the God of Death moving with incredible speed at that moment. A bolt of lightning intercepted Leo's attack, and another bolt struck Leo. Although he managed to block it, Setsuna looked up at the building's roof and saw the headmaster standing there with his familiar dragon. The headmaster asked if he was late, but Setsuna replied that he arrived just in time. The headmaster wondered if everything that happened in the competition within the walls had been Leo's doing, and if he had been keeping an eye on him ever since detecting the impure mana. Leo guessed that the headmaster was the head of the school for a reason. The headmaster had hoped the culprit wasn't one of their own students. In a fit of frustration, the headmaster shouted for Leo to give up his dragon, let out a deafening roar, and attacked with its flame ability. Setsuna could feel the incredible power behind the attack, but Leo remained unharmed. He remarked that it was the white dragon, the most powerful beast one could summon. If it weren't for the power granted to Leo by the demon god, he would have been in real danger. The headmaster understood that Leo was using magic disintegration. He recognized that such magic truly existed. Setsuna asked if the headmaster knew about magic disintegration. The headmaster explained that according to records passed down through the generations of the Silverlock family, when a mysterious dark force awakened, the world would be plunged into catastrophe. Magic disintegration was part of that evil power. Leo mocked them, stating that no magic could touch him. The headmaster. He then combined 3 attributes to launch an attack. Setsuna realized it was a 3-attribute combination magic. Leo rose into the air, gathering the power, and unleashed it in a devastating wave of energy. The headmaster's eyes widened, and he quickly instructed Setsuna to take 2 steps to the right. Setsuna followed the command and narrowly escaped Leo's attack. The headmaster was also dodging the attacks, which made Leo wonder what kind of magic the headmaster was using. The headmaster asked Leo if he was truly shocked, adding that he was the only one who knew how to neutralize such magic. Leo scoffed, finding it amusing, and promised to attack with even more power, challenging the headmaster to dodge that as well. Setsuna realized that this new power was likely the power of the God of Death. Leo threatened that he would finish them all. The headmaster sensed it wasn't just an ordinary power. At the rate Leo was attacking, everyone would soon be caught. In the crossfire of his magic, he called out to Setsuna, and Setsuna agreed with the headmaster's plan. The headmaster summoned the sacred butterfly to open its wings, and together, they flew into the sky. With the dragon, Leo watched, with a smirk on his face, watching the headmaster's desperate efforts to protect everyone. He pointed at the white dragon and taunted, "Come on." Both sides launched their attacks. Leo's attack was so powerful that it collided with the dragon, creating a massive explosion. Leo asked if the headmaster was ready to admit defeat. The headmaster replied that perhaps it was time for an old man like him to step aside. Setsuna rushed to attack Leo. Leo mocked him, saying it was a pity that Setsuna was hiding behind the dragon and preparing for his attack. He taunted, claiming that all of Setsuna's efforts would be in vain, as he created a barrier around himself. Setsuna replied, vowing to make Leo regret the arrogance he had shown. He reflected that choosing close-quarters combat magic had not been a mistake, and he would prove it with a single blow. Leo warned not to underestimate the power of the demon god, but when Setsuna attacked, he broke through Leo's barrier, landing a solid blow. Setsuna poured all his energy into speed, shattering Leo's barrier, and causing a massive explosion. The headmaster observed that even with magic disintegration, there was a limit to how quickly it could counteract magic. He appreciated Setsuna's determination. Leo was falling, gravely wounded. Setsuna realized that by using close-quarters magic, he had surpassed the rate of magic disintegration and defeated Leo. Now he truly understood that his choice had been the right one. He turned to the headmaster and said he thought they were out of danger for now. The headmaster praised him and suggested he tend to his wounds, but just as they were speaking, Leo rose again. Setsuna was shocked to see that his attack had not been effective. Leo, though injured, stood firm and prepared to counterattack. Leo used his power, gauging the moment, and then launched an attack against Setsuna. Setsuna tried to block it with his sword, but the weapon shattered, and Leo's attack struck, throwing him against a wall. Setsuna, also wounded, collapsed to the ground. Setsuna, weakened and losing consciousness, heard Leo's voice saying he couldn't believe he was still standing. He was such a powerful opponent. Setsuna wondered if Leo had somehow combined ranged magic with magic disintegration, but that couldn't be possible. His thoughts faded. Setsuna remembered a past moment when he was training to shoot targets. It had been a piece of cake for Leo. He told Leo that he had always been so skilled, and if he hadn't kept practicing, Leo would have surpassed him in no time. An amused Leo replied that it's really great to receive a compliment from a prodigy like him. During the war, Leo wondered aloud if he should fire another shot, and this time it would be at Setsuna. He told Setsuna to look behind him. When Setsuna turned, he saw that everyone else had been wounded and was being killed by monsters. Leo criticized Setsuna, saying he didn't deserve to be a hero, that he was a failure because he couldn't save everyone. He had abandoned them. With those harsh words echoing in his mind, Setsuna woke up in a bed, gravely injured. Layla was sitting beside him, relieved. She told him how happy she was that he had finally woken up, while he wondered where he was. She explained that he had been taken to the infirmary and that she had been very worried, as he had been unconscious for 3 days. Setsuna lamented his powerlessness, thinking he had been unable to do anything at such a crucial moment. He was powerless against the might of the demon god, just like in his past life. He then asked about the headmaster's condition. Layla replied that the headmaster should be in his office, and that she had heard there would be a meeting for all the department heads. As Setsuna was getting out of bed, Layla asked where he was going. He quickly got dressed, replying that he was going to see the headmaster as he had something to ask. Layla mentioned that he still wasn't completely healed. He placed a hand on her shoulder and apologized for making her worry, but he needed to see the headmaster immediately. He turned and left the infirmary. The headmaster had just finished a meeting with the other department heads and thanked everyone for their help as they were leaving. Someone commented that everyone would be quite busy for a while. Silas remarked that everything had gotten worse because of that boy. Seth arrived and opened the door, calling for the director. The director smiled and said he was happy to see Seth back with them. Silas, however, didn't look too pleased to see him. Lionel patted Seth's shoulder, saying that he had been through a lot. Everyone was worried about him, but he could update him on what happened later. As soon as they left, Seth stood before the director, lamenting that everything had happened because of him. He raised his hand towards the director, asking what happened after he lost consciousness. He winced in pain as he did so, and the director reminded him not to be too hard on himself. His injuries were still healing. The director went on to explain that, after Seth passed out, Leo said that, as much as he would have liked to finish the fight, he had already used too much mana. He decided to leave it for later, thinking it would be fun to face them again in the future. Leo then created a passage and disappeared, leaving a farewell message for the director, saying they would meet again, if the opportunity arose. The director thought that although it had been a golden opportunity, what lay beyond the passage was too dangerous to face at the moment. They would need to fight with all their strength. When the time came, Seth sat down, still lost in thought, and mentioned the mysterious entity and the border between dimensions that the director had also seen. The director asked Seth if he had any idea who it could be, and added that he had another question for him. How much did Seth really know? The director added that since Seth even knew about the director's secret magic, he could now explain what happened so that he could fully trust him. Seth hesitated, wondering if it was time to tell the truth. Could he convince the director that he was from the future? The director asked if there was any reason Seth couldn't tell him. At that moment, Seth had an idea and asked the director to take a look at the Daendai Amulet of Rebirth. The surprised director examined it closely and said it was the blessing of the spirit of time, which had disappeared. If it had already been used in a different time, the possibility of time travel seemed likely. Seth explained that the director had figured it out, that Seth had traveled back 10 years from the future using the amulet after losing everything. He then told the director everything. The God of Death would destroy the world, and he, along with his followers, would kill the director. The director acknowledged that it was hard to believe, but the presence of the amulet made it undeniable. Even if the spirit's power had enabled Seth to travel through time, the events of the future must have been incredibly shocking for Seth to endure, leading him to go back an entire decade. The director placed a hand on Seth's shoulder and said that Seth had truly carried a heavy burden, but now he would help in any way he could. Seth felt a wave of relief and hope. With the director by his side, he felt that maybe he had a chance to fight, and perhaps the world wouldn't fall to ruin after all. The director then said he would teach Seth a second type of magic to use against the God of Death. He explained that this power was not part of the original branches of magic, but rather elemental magic. The director suggested it would be best for them to relocate for a while to train together. They made their way to the World Tree. The director commented that it had been a long time since he was last there. He used to come train there when he was younger. Seth was surprised to hear this. Once at the World Tree, the director explained elemental magic in simple terms. It was a type of magic where the caster uses mana to become one with the elemental spirits, cultivating a powerful force within his body. Because of its unique nature, elemental magic had a different starting point compared to the standard branches of magic and could be combined with other forms of magic, making it incredibly versatile and useful. Setsuna wondered if this was really possible. The headmaster replied that he supposed he should demonstrate how to use it. As the headmaster prepared to use his elemental magic, his eyes shone brightly. Setsuna noticed that the color of his eyes had changed, just like when the headmaster fought against Leo. The headmaster then suggested they play rock, paper, scissors. Confused, Setsuna asked why, and the headmaster explained that, since Setsuna was still injured, they couldn't exactly duel right now. He added that they could at least play a game to pass the time. They began to play, and the headmaster won every round, telling Setsuna to try again. They played several times, and every single time, Setsuna lost. Finally, the headmaster explained that the power of the time spirit from elemental magic granted him the ability of foresight, allowing him to see several seconds into the future. He further elaborated that there are various elemental spirits, and depending on the spirit one contracts with, they can gain unique abilities. For example, if someone made a contract with the wind spirit, they would be able to fly, and with the water spirit, they could easily dodge attacks. Setsuna was amazed, realizing that mastering elemental magic could give him the ability to use close-quarters magic in various ways. The headmaster then revealed that Setsuna couldn't practice this magic until he entered into a contract with an elemental spirit, and there was a crucial first step to be taken. Curious, Setsuna asked what the first step was. The headmaster explained that they needed to try at that very moment. He used his power to clear his mind and become one with nature. He instructed Setsuna to try and feel the presence of the spirits, since they existed throughout all of nature. Setsuna focused, thinking about becoming one with nature. He concentrated on the spirits, hoping they would grant him the power to fight against the god of death. But nothing happened. He felt nothing. Frustrated, he thought that he couldn't feel a single spirit. The headmaster, noticing his frustration, explained that it seemed Setsuna's temperament was working against him. Setsuna wondered what he meant by that. The headmaster explained that, to become one with nature, Setsuna needed to reach a state of trance. He needed to empty his mind to truly feel the spirits around him. Setsuna tried to concentrate, but found it difficult to focus. His mind wandered, thinking about how he was struggling to concentrate, and all he really wanted was to become stronger. Noticing his discomfort, the headmaster placed a hand on his shoulder and reassured him, telling him not to rush. He explained that it took him 3 whole years to truly feel nature and connect with the spirits. Setsuna, realizing that the god would appear in 5 years, said that they didn't have that much time. The still patient headmaster asked what Setsuna meant. Setsuna replied that there was no time to lose. The apostles of the god of death could appear at any moment, and there was no way of knowing when. The headmaster was surprised by the mention of the apostles, so Setsuna explained that just like the god of death, they came from a different world and possessed special powers that were different from magic. He added that Leo was undoubtedly one of them. Setsuna remembered that before traveling back in time, he had only managed to fight against one apostle. That adversary had been extremely powerful, and even with everything he had, Setsuna barely managed to defeat him using long-range magic. The headmaster nodded and mentioned that according to the records of the Silverlock family, there were supposedly 12 apostles in total. Setsuna recognized this, realizing that there were surely others like Leo who wished to bring ruin and destruction to their world. Understanding Setsuna's concern, the director reassured him, saying that there was no need to be so impatient, as fear and anxiety can sometimes invite disaster, and rushing things recklessly can be dangerous. Instead, he proposed a solution: joint training in the dungeon. He believed it would be an excellent opportunity for Setsuna to gain valuable insights and grow stronger. Setsuna was curious about this joint training, and he asked for more details. The director told him that Lionel would explain everything in detail. The training would be a chance for Setsuna to overcome his limits, get stronger, and improve even more. However, he also warned that it would not be easy, and he advised Setsuna to get plenty of rest before starting. Leo was released into a dimly lit place that resembled a castle. He apologized for being late and stepped forward. Zagan, the 10th apostle, commented that Leo had a lot of nerve to make them wait like this, and wondered if Leo was still stuck in his old habits. Puka, the 9th apostle, walked upside down on the ceiling and mentioned that he heard Leo had messed with the wrong student. He wondered how Leo managed to get into so much trouble, especially after Bogate fled after Leo defeated him. Puka asked how Leo planned to clean up the mess. Leo, the 12th apostle, apologized, explaining that he was having so much fun reuniting with an old friend that he ended up getting carried away. Zagan, annoyed, told him to wipe that smile off his face, as it was bothering him. As Zagan and Leo stared into each other's eyes, Zagan prepared to attack. However, someone from a distance intervened, telling them that such behavior was foolish, especially for apostles. The man reminded them that they should refrain from any actions that could hinder the ambitions of their god, and they certainly knew better than that. The man was Satanaxia, the 2nd apostle. He pressured the two with his power and asked if they had anything more to say. Zagan stopped and, pointing at Leo, asked if Satanaxia planned to deal with the boy, who couldn't even finish his task. He suggested that, if necessary, he would kill the boy himself. Puka, amused, said that if they wanted an assassination, they should leave it to him. He claimed that if he did it, it would be a grand spectacle. Satanaxia replied that it wouldn't be necessary, as he had already dealt with it. He added that the person he had asked to handle the situation would take care of it in the end. A few days after the intermediate competition, the scene shifted to a classroom, where Setsuna was sitting with other students at their desks. Layla approached him and asked if he was sure that he was okay to attend class. He nodded, explaining that he just needed to sit and listen, which wasn't too tiring. Layla pointed out that it had only been a few days since the final match ended, and yet he had gotten hurt again. She wondered if something was bothering him. Lately, Setsuna remembered his conversation with the director, who said that announcing the existence of the God of Death and his apostles would be premature at this time. The director had decided to entrust this information to a few instructors, and assign them the task of protecting the academy and finding Leo. He also suggested that the elemental magic training of Setsuna be halted for now. He paused, apologizing to Layla for asking her to make an herbal remedy for him, but assured her he was fine. He thought that he needed to recover quickly to restart his training. Clenching his fists, he resolved to improve as quickly as possible. Layla sat down beside him. Lionel approached the board and announced that it seemed everyone was present now. He then spoke about the upcoming interdepartmental joint training. The students wondered what it was about, and Lionel explained that the training would be a collaboration between departments. If the intramural contest had been an opportunity to observe and learn different combat techniques, this training would focus on forming teams with students from various departments to further discover and improve their own skill sets. Setsuna thought that with students from other departments involved, the goal was to foster collaboration between them. Lionel then directed the students to the projector, where the image of a one-star underground dungeon appeared. He explained that this dungeon was a replica of the kind they might encounter in real life. Given the risks involved, the participants would be selected on a voluntary basis. The training would begin in 1 week, so they were advised to conserve their strength until then. Setsuna thought about the joint training the director had mentioned, realizing he needed to recover and be in top form by then. Later that evening, after the class had ended, Setsuna and Layla walked together. She asked him if he wanted to go to dinner, reminding him that he needed to eat plenty to recover his strength for the upcoming training. He wondered what they should eat. Other students recognized him as the winner of the intramural contest and as an extremely powerful melee mage. A blushing girl told another that she had a huge crush on him since the final match. Layla told Setsuna that everyone seemed interested in him now, especially when it was not long ago that they called him a loser. He agreed with her words. Stepping in front of him were 3 boys, one with yellow hair and the other 2 with red hair. They approached Setsuna. The yellow-haired boy pointed at Setsuna, acknowledging his achievement as the winner of the year's contest. Setsuna asked who the boy was. The red-haired boy introduced the yellow-haired one as Cal, the head of a noble salon. They had heard that Setsuna would be joining the mage army immediately after graduation. Cal invited Setsuna to his salon and said he should consider it a great honor. Setsuna wondered what the salon was. Cal revealed that it was a social club for mages of noble lineage, and certainly not a place for someone like him, a melee mage. However, he would grant Setsuna special permission to join them. Cal believed that having the contest winner as a member would certainly raise the salon's profile. The girls in the distance got excited. Upon hearing that Setsuna was being recruited for the noble salon, Cal, with a smug expression, told Setsuna that an elite mage like him should be careful about who he associates with. He pointed at Layla and commented that if Setsuna spent time with commoners like her, it could harm his status. Setsuna, however, rejected Cal's offer, leaving the 3 boys shocked. He turned to leave, asking if someone's origin was really that important. He then asked Layla, "Shall we go?" Cal was furious at this, and one of the boys commented that it was not something Cal should say to the contest winner. An enraged Cal drew a chain and, with fury in his eyes, demanded to know how Setsuna dared to insult the nobles. He was about to attack with a blade forged into the chain and rushed towards Setsuna. Setsuna calmly turned his head and saw Layla stepping forward. She stopped Cal, saying that dueling, entering without permission, was against the academy's rules. She then stated clearly that if anyone was being rude, it was Cal. Cal's attack was interrupted, and he was boiling with rage, questioning how a commoner like Layla had the courage to stop him. The other 2 boys looked at Cal, worried if he was okay. Cal reluctantly withdrew his hand from Layla, and the 3 of them departed with him, promising to tell his father about the incident. Layla smiled at Aiden and thought that she was also growing up. It was then that someone else called out to him. He wondered who it could be now. It turned out to be Carol, who waved at him. He mentioned that he was happy to see she was getting better. Carol smiled and replied that it was all thanks to him. That's why she wanted to thank him properly, so she asked him to come to her room for a moment, even blushing a little. Layla wondered what was happening. The scene changed to Carol's room, where she welcomed Aiden, Drago, and Layla, saying that she was preparing a meal to thank them for saving her life, and that it would take a while to finish. Aiden, still feeling uneasy, insisted that she didn't have to go to such trouble. Carol assured him it was nothing, and that if he waited, the meal would be ready soon. Layla offered to help Carol, pointing out that it would be a lot of work for one person. Carol thanked her for the offer. Layla thought that Carol had only invited Aiden to the meal, but she couldn't help but imagine something much less innocent. Then, a confused Drago asked why he was also invited. Carol smiled and replied that, the more, the merrier. Carol and Layla went to the kitchen where Layla commented that she had never seen anything like it before. She had no idea that there were foods that aided in healing. Carol explained that those were known as recovery foods. Aiden, looking around the room, thought to himself about what the headmaster had said. Carol had practically no memory related to Leo, and it could be temporary amnesia due to the shock. But Leo might have managed to access her memories. While they were grateful she was okay, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that someone might come after her again. Drago asked what Aiden was thinking about so intensely. He noticed that Aiden sometimes took himself too seriously, and suggested that he try to relax a little. Aiden thought about it, but then a loud noise came from the kitchen, sounding almost like an explosion. He anxiously wondered if Carol and Layla were training in there. Drago was also surprised. Carol then called Drago into the kitchen to help. When he entered, she handed him a tight apron, making him wonder if he really had to wear it. She apologized, explaining that the only apron she had was one designed for maids. They continued to prepare the meal together, and soon it was ready to be served. As Aiden was about to sit down to eat, Layla mentioned that they had gone a little overboard and made too much food. Aiden smiled, saying that everything looked great, and since they had worked so hard to cook for him, he would eat all of it. He took a bite, thinking that if he strengthened his physique by eating well, he could eat as much as he wanted without getting sick. As he continued eating, Layla approached and asked if he was forcing himself to eat. He smiled and reassured her that it was fine, then asked who had made the egg drop soup, because it had an incredible umami flavor. Drago, smiling, replied that it seemed Aiden was enjoying the food he had made, and there was still plenty, so he should just eat up since Aiden had asked for another bowl. Carol was shocked that her cooking had lost to Drago's. Everyone continued enjoying the meal, and Aiden thought it was good to spend time like this with everyone. This reminded him of the days before he traveled back in time, when he and his friends spent every day together peacefully and happily. Vidrak had been the one who took that peace from them, but Seth promised that it wouldn't happen again. He wouldn't lose to Vidrak or anyone else again. The scene shifted to 2 weeks later on the day of the joint dungeon training. A large number of students were gathered in front of the dungeon gate. Chatting excitedly, Drago and Seth were among them, and Drago commented that Seth looked healthier that day. Seth replied that he felt great and was much better, all thanks to the recovery food Drago had made. He really appreciated it. Drago assured him it was no problem, saying it was the least he could do for a friend. He added that the recovery food only worked if they ate it regularly. Seth thought to himself that the dungeon training should be smooth. With Drago and his team, he could fully trust and rely on him. Then a boy and a girl approached. The boy asked if Seth and Drago had been on the team for long. Drago replied that the upperclassmen had finally arrived. The boy introduced himself as Mayfun, a third-year student in the Formation Magic department. He said they would be on the same team for the training. The girl who was covering her head then took off her hood to introduce herself as Yuzura, and mentioned she was looking forward to working with them. Drago introduced himself from the Close Quarters Combat Magic department, and Seth introduced himself as well. Mayfun patted both of their shoulders, asking if Seth was the winner of this year's intramural contest. He smiled, and said it was safe to say they were in good hands, and he was counting on them. As Mayfun walked on a bit, Drago turned to Seth and said that Mayfun seemed more spirited than he expected, and Yuzura added that it was good to put their juniors at ease. Like that, Mayfun wondered aloud if she thought so, and he hoped they appreciated it, because he wouldn't be taking it easy on them. From that point on, at that moment, the instructor spoke up, saying it seemed all the students had arrived, and that the interdepartmental training would now begin. He introduced himself as Giovanni, the instructor for the session, and also the instructor for the Formation Magic department. He explained that, as they were all aware, the Formation and Close Quarters departments would be participating in the training together, and today they would be entering the Demonic Ruins. It was a 1-star class dungeon inhabited by ancient monsters and other creatures, and the students would need to work together to defeat the monsters. Giovanni summoned a bracelet and showed it to the group. He explained that it was time for everyone to contribute, as their achievements would be recorded in the bracelet's memory. They would earn points whenever they defeated a creature or collected treasure. The team with the highest score would receive a medal from the academy, and if an individual's score exceeded 100 points, they would get a chance to participate. In the Royal Mage Army's field training, the mention of the Royal Mage Army reminded Seth of the past, where a group of the kingdom's most powerful mages resided. He had met many comrades in that army. If he participated in the field training, he could surely see them all again. Giovanni continued distributing the bracelets to each participant. He reminded them to stay in the areas that weren't too dangerous. If they didn't follow his advice, they could face monsters far too powerful for them. He also warned them to be especially cautious, and not to descend to the lowest level of the dungeon. In case of an emergency, they should channel their mana into the bracelet, which would activate a teleportation spell to bring them back outside. Seth had already decided that he would aim for 100 points, but then he paused. He and Drago coincidentally mentioned aiming for 200 points. They exchanged a look, and Drago said that today they could finally try. Setsuna agreed, saying that Drago was right. Giovanni asked if everyone was ready, and then they finally started to enter. Setsuna and Drago, however, rushed ahead as the joint training began, Setsuna running alongside Drago. He thought that they had arrived at the demonic ruins in a 1-star class dungeon, an underground structure built by an ancient civilization. Complete with traps and treasure chests still in place, the monsters inhabiting the area would undoubtedly attack them on sight. Setsuna commented that even with access to teleportation magic, he had a feeling the training wouldn't be easy. For them, Drago suggested looking ahead as a path had opened before them. They were amazed. Upon finding an incredible castle-like structure, they admired the vast underground space. Setsuna touched an area. Wondering if it was part of an ancient plant, it seemed an ecosystem had developed inside the ruins. They remembered the director's words, that the training would give them a chance to become one with nature, offering great rewards and valuable insights into magic. Elemental, he intended to make the most of this opportunity. Other students had also arrived, and Mifan wondered what the rush was. And Zuko pointed at something ahead, and the other students were talking around them. One group then followed a path. With the man warning that the other paths were all traps, Mifan commented that those 4 were fools for this type of training. They should take the harder path. He then pointed to a different path, saying they should go that way. Setsuna thought that Mifan wasn't wrong. Since the ultimate goal was to accumulate points, Mifan asked if Setsuna was coming, and Setsuna, feeling uneasy, touched a wall. Realizing it was fake, Drago asked what it was. Setsuna explained that the plants growing on the wall were in a different stage of growth compared to the others, suggesting there was another space beyond it. Mifan asked if the growth stages were just a coincidence, but Setsuna disagreed, saying he could hear the wind coming from inside, just as he was about to elaborate. Drago punched the wall to see what was ahead. Setsuna looked at the new path and suggested they go that way. He and Drago moved forward quickly, while Mifan commented that they had gained incredible knowledge, which was certainly impressive. With a little luck, they would score a lot of points. As Setsuna and Drago climbed the stairs, a giant ball suddenly started rolling from above. Setsuna quickly drew his sword to destroy it. Small pieces of rock rolled down the stairs, forcing Drago and Mifan to dodge them. Setsuna looked at Drago, asking if he was ready to go. Drago clenched his fists, eager to prove himself. He said he wanted to make a good impression on everyone, and show how powerful close-quarters combat magic could be. Besides, he couldn't let Setsuna beat him. Suddenly, with a flash, several arrows shot towards them. Setsuna skillfully dodged, and then destroyed the source of the arrows. Drago was impressed with Setsuna's incredible reflexes, observing how he always seemed to be one step ahead of every situation. He commented that if they dealt with all the traps, the upperclassmen should be able to follow them without any problems. Then he spotted a chest before they could react. Mifan used magic to open the chest. Thanking Drago for his help, he claimed the treasure and gained 15 points. Drago was shocked, realizing that the person who opened the chest would get the treasure. He swore he wouldn't let Mifan get away with it next time. Setsuna and Drago ran ahead, but Drago sensed something strange along the nearby wall. He knocked it open and found another treasure chest. However, before he could touch it, Mifune used his magic to snatch it, increasing his score to 30 points, while Drago remained at 0. As they continued, Drago encountered a night obstacle. He attacked, slicing off its hands and other parts, but in the end, Mifune arrived to decapitate it and steal the 10 points for himself. Drago finally earned 10 points, while Yuzura also had 30 points. Mifune, however, had stolen more points from Drago, bringing his total to 55, which left Drago furious. During a short rest, Mifune told Drago that, despite his skill, he lacked awareness of his surroundings and asked how many points Drago expected to earn with that mentality. Setsuna had 25 points, and reflected on the situation. Although the rules didn't require group members to divide items fairly, he believed that stealing the achievements of his juniors was wrong, and that the seniors should act with more integrity. Yuzura asked Mifune if he heard that. Mifune scoffed, saying they were just losers, who couldn't fight, and only complained about the rules. He pointed out that people are meant to be taken advantage of, and they were only upset because they hadn't tried to use their skills on him. He stated that despite their complaints, it seemed they lacked the skill to do so. Setsuna thought to himself that he shouldn't underestimate Mifune. He looked at Yuzura, wondering why she had been so focused on attacking monsters since earlier. She didn't seem to care about accumulating points. Could she have a hidden motive? As they continued, Yuzura had 50 points, while Mifune led with 80. Mifune boasted that after a few more victories, he would have all the points he needed. Setsuna had 35 points, and Drago still only had 10. They entered a dimly lit room, and Setsuna felt an unsettling presence in the air. In the center of the room, something was placed, on a throne. Without hesitation, Mifune used his magic to grab the object. However, as soon as he did, a dark aura emerged from the treasure, leaving Mifune confused. Setsuna immediately realized what was happening. He rushed forward, pulling Mifune back just in time as a powerful lightning attack was launched from the treasure. A hand emerged from the chest, followed by a monstrous creature. Although it was only a 1-star class dungeon, the monster's presence and strength seemed far more threatening than anything they had encountered so far. Setsuna immediately understood that it was the lifeless king, the monarch of death. He heard the black fire whisper that it was loose and would trap and torment whoever it hit. The monster growled, asking who dared to interrupt its sleep, warning that they would pay with their lives. Drago was shocked that the monster could communicate with them. Setsuna quickly warned Drago that it was dangerous, and that he would take care of it. He told Drago to stay back and let him handle the monster. Drago, still thinking about the points, asked aloud how many he would get if he defeated the creature. The monster launched an attack toward Mifune, but Setsuna rushed to intercept it, deflecting the attack with his sword. Drago tried to punch the monster, but the creature conjured a barrier that stopped Drago in his tracks. Drago was shocked to see that it had cast a magic circle from so far away. As he fell back, he thought that the Mana Guard probably saved him from serious injury. The furious monster charged at them, declaring that it would finish them. It cast several magic circles simultaneously, and Setsuna thought to himself that with such intelligence and magic, this monster must be at least a 4-star level. All the attacks occurred at the same time, and a magic circle appeared in front of Mifune. Setsuna shouted for him to wake up as Drago attacked the magic circle near Mifune, saving him from the attack. Mifune came to his senses, and Drago extended a hand to help him up. Mifune accepted Drago's support to get to his feet, but Setsuna quickly noticed that 2 more magic circles were forming around Yuzura. She wasn't moving, just standing still. Setsuna acted quickly, jumping to grab her and pull her out of danger. He asked if she was okay, and she nodded, thanking him for asking. Setsuna felt that something was wrong, and Yuzura was acting strange, but he wondered if he was overthinking it. Meanwhile, Drago was cutting through magic circles, clearing the path. Setsuna touched his bracelet and told Drago to use something. Drago understood immediately and replied that he was thinking the same thing. Mifune, however, had no idea what they were talking about. He figured it was none of his business and just wanted to get the points and leave as quickly as possible. Drago looked at Mifune and asked if he was really planning to do the same thing again. Mifune denied it, stating he wouldn't do such a thing to the person who saved his life. He said he would do the opposite and help, but only so he could claim the points for himself later. Drago, however, was resolute. He wouldn't let Mifune steal his points this time. Meanwhile, Setsuna reflected on his past fight with Leo in the final blue field. He realized that his charged bullet hadn't been as powerful as it should have been, which cost him the victory. This experience taught him how important it was to master the basics before advancing further. Setsuna then recalled his conversation with Lionel when he and Drago had completed their training at the court. They asked Lionel if there was anything else they could do to become even stronger. Lionel sighed, as if he had no choice but to tell them, and mentioned it was time for them to use something he had been saving: magically weighted bands. He explained that by wearing these bands during training, they would gain even more strength. As soon as they took them off, their physical abilities would increase significantly. However, he specifically warned Setsuna not to push himself too hard, as he hadn't fully recovered. He emphasized that this was a brute force training method, the old-fashioned way, so they needed to use it wisely. Setsuna and Drago thanked him for the advice, and now, in the heat of battle, Setsuna knew it was time to remove the bands they had been wearing since that day. Both he and Drago threw them off. Mifune watched in disbelief. They were wearing those things the whole time? The monster created another magic circle, preparing to attack. However, with their restraints removed, both Setsuna and Drago activated their physical boost, dashing towards the monster with incredible speed. They effortlessly dodged its attacks, counterattacking with swift and powerful strikes. Drago launched himself at the monster, delivering a powerful kick, but the creature managed to block it. Drago smiled. That block might have worked before, but now it's too late. Before the monster could react, both Setsuna and Drago delivered a devastating blow at the same time. Mifune was in shock. How are they so skilled? A massive explosion erupted, shaking the entire area. When the dust settled, the lifeless king was finally defeated. Their points shot up by 50 each. Drago guessed the points were split evenly, since they had defeated the monster together. Mifune, still stunned, couldn't believe what he had witnessed. This was the true extent of their abilities. He had never seen close combat magic students as strong as them. At that moment, Setsuna turned to call for Yuzura, but she was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. A powerful earthquake rocked the dungeon, and cracks began to form beneath their feet. Mifune lost his balance and was about to fall, but Setsuna caught him in time. Then they noticed something alarming, a swarm of terrifying monsters appearing in the distance. The creatures roared, their eyes were filled with fury, and in an instant, they attacked the students. Panic spread as the students ran to escape. Setsuna's heart raced. What was happening in this dungeon? As the monsters closed in Setsuna, along with Drago and Mifune began to slay them. Setsuna instructed that they should focus only on the monsters' heads. As Mifune eliminated them, he realized they weren't gaining any points from the kills. He realized that if Setsuna hadn't figured this out, it wouldn't be the right time for them to be fighting these creatures. While killing the zombies, Setsuna deduced that the revived monsters, using the power of darkness, were not granting points because they resurrected continuously. Drago commented that there was nothing of value in these creatures. Mifune further commented on the unusual appearance of these monsters in a one-star dungeon. Setsuna felt an aura emanating from below. He asked the others if they could feel the sinister magic rising from beneath them. Mifune uncertainly asked if Setsuna was sure he wasn't imagining it. Setsuna was certain. Believing the source could be Yuzura, Drago decided to go down first and Mifune wondered if he should follow. Setsuna replied that it really wasn't a choice, and asked Mifune what he intended to do without them. Mifune felt a bit offended, as if his competence was being questioned. Setsuna then pointed out that Mifune's only skill was stealing points from the juniors before heading down the stairs. Mifune noticed that the monsters kept appearing, and commented that there was nothing he liked about this training. Reluctantly, Mifune followed Setsuna. As he watched Setsuna and Drago fight the monsters, he noted how synchronized they were. He wondered if it was the first time they had trained together. Drago, noticing Mifune's chatter, commented that Mifune was quite talkative, to which Mifune replied that it was better than listening to the undead groaning. Setsuna continued toward the source of the mana that he had sensed earlier. They eventually found the monster responsible and realized it might be the root cause of the dark power. Setsuna identified it as a new type of eye monster that he hadn't seen before, and noted that the magic circle inside the dungeon was the source of all this magic. Mifune, realizing the others didn't understand the best strategy for dungeons, suggested that they follow his lead. While Drago was stretching, he accidentally hit Mifune and then apologized for it. Setsuna dealt a decisive blow to the monster, earning 10 points for the defeat. At that moment, they heard a thunderous sound, and Drago asked if the undead were coming their way. Setsuna replied that the undead must have realized their source was under attack, and they would probably take care of everything to increase their points. Drago, eager to release his stress, was ready to face the undead. Mifune wondered if both Setsuna and Drago felt no fear while he, as a student, could only stand by and cower. He needed to get 100 points and get out of the dungeon as quickly as possible. Setsuna then asked Mifune about Yuzura. Mifune wasn't sure either, but supposed she had run away in fear. However, Setsuna was not satisfied with that answer, because Yuzura didn't seem scared even when they faced the lifeless king. Setsuna was getting a strange vibe from her. Besides, there were monsters they had never encountered before in a one-star dungeon, and they were exuding dark magic. This was making Setsuna uneasy. Although he might be overthinking it, he suspected that one of the apostles could be behind everything. If that were the case, it would be dangerous for Drago and Mifune to be there. He hoped that Lila and the other students were safe. Drago noticed the undead were closing in on them and suggested they start hunting. He began punching the undead. With the help of Setsuna and Mifune, they were racking up points, and after defeating the monsters, Setsuna had 225 points. Drago had 210, and Mifune had 125. Mifune decided it was best to leave. Drago asked if he wasn't going to look for his friend, Yuzura. Mifune explained that the conversation they had the day before was the first time they had ever spoken, and he found it strange that she approached him and acted so friendly. He assumed she had gotten scared, run away, and was now crying and trembling outside. As Mifune was about to leave, Setsuna told Drago that they both needed to look for Yuzura. Mifune argued that he wasn't being transported out of the dungeon. Setsuna suggested that Mifune walk back, and a surprised Mifune asked if they were messing with him. Despite his reluctance, Mifune followed them. Drago mentioned that it seemed like the transportation spell wasn't working, so something might be wrong with their bracelets. Setsuna once again felt the sinister magic rising from below. He told Drago he would go on ahead and look for Yuzura, adding that he would be fine wandering alone. A shocked Mifune asked if Setsuna had a crush on her. Drago reassured Setsuna, telling him not to worry, and that he would help look for Yuzura. Setsuna agreed, reminding Drago to run if he sensed any danger. Mifune, still unsure, thought it would be better to go back to Giovanni and report everything. After all, there was no guarantee Yuzura was down there. Setsuna told him that although her presence was faint, he could still sense her mana. He suggested that Mifune inform Giovanni of what had happened and be careful on the way back. Mifune felt annoyed, thinking that Yuzura had probably run off on her own. It seemed dangerous to go any further, but even more dangerous to try and escape alone. He felt like everything was going wrong. Drago placed a hand on Mifune's shoulder, encouraging him. "Let's find Yuzura and stick together." Mifune agreed, saying that as long as they could leave as soon as they found her, they would be fine. They descended the stairs, and Mifune wondered how only Setsuna could sense Yuzura's mana. Setsuna replied that it was because he had practiced how to sense mana. Suddenly, Drago stopped, feeling a chill in the air, as if there was almost no oxygen. They stopped and listened carefully, hearing a sound. Setsuna pointed in the direction the sound had come from. Drago moved forward, mentioning that someone was there. Mifune asked aloud if it was Yuzura. To his relief, it was indeed Yuzura, sitting inside a dark magic circle. Half of her body was being absorbed by the circle, and she was begging for help. Mifune closed his eyes, wondering what had happened to Yuzura. Setsuna told Drago not to get any closer, explaining that she had fallen into a trap. He pointed out that there were no signs of the trap having been activated in the dungeon, and suspected that Yuzura had used an item imbued with dark magic. He believed it was the same type of item his friend had found on the black market before he traveled back in time. Was sure that Yuzura had not used it consciously, which meant someone had set a trap for her. He explained that the trap could only be disarmed with a specific spell, and that they needed a weapon imbued with that spell to destroy it. Determined, Setsuna tried to break the trap and managed to pull Yuzura out of the magic circle. She collapsed in his arms as he whispered for her to hang on. He realized that the magic was coming from the earring she was wearing. Mayumi wondered what had happened after she disappeared, and if there was any way to fix it. Setsuna lifted her onto his back, saying they needed to take care of her. He was relieved to have found her, before things got worse, and promised to explain everything to Giovanni later. He was certain that everything happening there was due to the Apostle's influence. Draco watched as everything unfolded strangely, but remembered that the priority was to escape with Yuzura. Setsuna asked Mayumi to try using the transportation spell again. Mayumi tried, but discovered it was not working. He wondered aloud if Giovanni had given him a defective one. Setsuna then tried Yuzura's bracelet but found it was not working either. Draco suggested they leave before things got worse. At that moment, a rumbling sound shook the ground, and they wondered if it was an earthquake. They needed to get out quickly. Draco told the two of them to follow closely behind him. Mayumi thought there was never a dull moment in this cursed dungeon. Suddenly, rocks began to fall in their path, and Draco urged Mayumi to hurry, but it was too late. The debris completely blocked the exit. Setsuna suggested they take a safer route. Meanwhile, Layla and her group were moving through the dungeon, calling out to see if anyone was nearby. They heard someone cry for help, and discovered an injured boy trapped under the rocks. They quickly helped him, and Layla used healing magic to stabilize him. The injured boy wondered if anyone else was trapped under the rubble. The injured boy told them there was one more person, behind the debris. Layla hoped that Setsuna and Draco were okay, and that they could find them soon. Meanwhile, Setsuna and his group were sitting near the fallen rocks, with Draco wondering if they could use a charged bullet to get through the debris. Setsuna replied that it would be dangerous to use a charged bullet, as it could trigger another earthquake. Draco said they had a good chance of getting out once the rocks were cleared. Setsuna agreed, but warned that they had to be careful, due to the lack of oxygen. While Draco pondered a solution, Setsuna said there was a way, but they would need to go deeper into the dungeon to make it happen. However, they could not do that with Mayumi and Yuzura in their current state. As it would be difficult to carry the two of them, Setsuna decided to go down alone and investigate. Mayumi wondered if Setsuna had a trick up his sleeve. He knew Setsuna was incredibly strong, but there could be even more powerful monsters further down. He hesitated, not wanting Setsuna to risk his life. Setsuna was not sure, but speculated that the earthquake was the result of the dungeon's awakening. The failure of the transportation spell was likely due to the immense mana surrounding them, making the place no longer a one-star dungeon. Draco commented that Setsuna was perceptive, having figured out what was happening almost immediately. Setsuna believed it was because he had experienced something similar before when he traveled through time. Mayumi asked Draco to stay behind, wishing Setsuna good luck. Setsuna reassured them, saying, "Don't worry, I'll be fine," and asked Draco to mark the spot they had passed. He then set off, promising to find a way out of the dungeon. As Setsuna advanced deeper into the dungeon, he wondering if he could defeat the dungeon boss with only close-quarters combat magic. If he could use fire or purification magic, it would have been much easier to deal with the undead. Close-quarters combat magic relied mainly on physical attacks, and its main drawback was the difficulty in performing elemental magic. However, for some reason, he felt a vast power swirling within him. Meanwhile, Drago was clearing the stones, and Mayumi watched on, reflecting that she once thought winning the contest in the close-quarters combat magic department was just luck. But now, seeing Drago's strength, she realized that wasn't the case. Both Drago and Setsuna had trained hard. While he resorted to dirty tricks, they felt foolish. Drago, encouraging them to stay strong, reassured Mifune that they would manage to get out. Suddenly, they heard a voice asking if anyone was there. Drago responded, confirming the sound from the other side of the debris. Layla's team was also searching for survivors. A boy from Layla's group said he heard the sound of someone moving. Curious, Layla asked if it was really Drago, and called out, asking if it was him and where Setsuna was. Drago replied that they were there, but Setsuna had gone to find another exit. Eager to help, Layla asked if they could help move the stones while Setsuna was heading down the stairs. He felt the air growing denser and heavier, signaling that he must be approaching the center of the dungeon. He spotted a gate, and wondered if it led to the exit, but the presence of the dungeon boss made him cautious. He found it strange that a place so full of dark energy was so empty, putting him on high alert. From above, 2 pairs of eyes watched him intently. Suddenly, a monster lunged at him, but he quickly jumped back to dodge the attack, trying to understand what it was. Observing it closely, he noticed it had 2 heads, confirming it was a 2-headed Hydra. Setsuna understood what was causing the chaos in the dungeon. The signs of decay on various parts of the Hydra's body suggested it had been forcibly resurrected. The only power capable of such a feat was V-Drake. The Hydra released a poisonous gas, and Setsuna jumped back to avoid it, thinking it would be too dangerous to stay too close for too long. If he didn't deal with it soon, things in the dungeon would only get worse. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, remembering that he needed to defeat the Hydra as quickly as possible. He charged forward, attacking it with his weapons. Even after multiple strikes, he dashed to the creature's rear, remembering his past fight with a Hydra. He recalled that it didn't die until its heads were severed, so he focused on attacking, 1 head at a time. He realized his attacks weren't very effective against the Hydra's hard skull, so he aimed for its weakest point, determined to sever at least 1 head. The Hydra's second head attacked him with acid, and although Setsuna dodged, some of it splashed onto his clothes, causing them to melt. He thought that if the acid had hit his body directly, he wouldn't have survived. Suddenly, the severed head regenerated, and he realized the Hydra had regenerative abilities similar to those of the undead. The battle would never end if he kept cutting off 1 head at a time. He needed to take down both heads at once. With his ranged magic, he could have cast spell after spell and won easily. But he wanted to test a technique he had been training. He remembered a time when he couldn't perform it, but then Lionel approached him, asking if he was practicing using 2 weapons. It was impressive for a student from the forest to attempt such a technique, but it seemed Setsuna's body couldn't execute what he had visualized. In his mind, Lionel explained how difficult it was, and that they first needed to master the control of mana within their bodies. Setsuna reflected on the importance of commanding his mana. He was thinking about his body, as it was before time traveling, but realized that his current body was different. Thanks to continuing his basic training, while recovering he became very good at controlling his mana. But this was the first time he tried the technique. Since that day, he focused, thinking that he first needed to grab the sword he was most familiar with, and then draw the second sword to attack. He tried, but his blade felt weak as soon as it was in the air. The Hydra's tail hit him, throwing him against the wall. However, he managed to regain his balance and prepared to try again. He realized he was spending much more mana than he expected. Once again, the Hydra attacked with acid, but he moved quickly, thinking that if he delayed it, he would be in real danger if he got hit again. He knew his body wouldn't survive, and he couldn't afford to die, so he took a step back. Thinking that this was his last chance, he inhaled deeply, concentrating all his energy, reminding himself that he couldn't lose focus now. He made the Hydra crash against the wall, and then jumped, using both swords to deliver a series of strikes. After a series of attacks, the Hydra's head finally fell, as Satsuna had suspected it couldn't survive, losing both heads, and must have reached its regeneration limit. He looked at his injured hand, thinking that his dual blade technique was still not perfect. He would need to keep training if he wanted to use it comfortably. Giovanni suddenly appeared applauding, and commented that defeating his creation, using only hand-to-hand magic, was impressive. He assumed that Satsuna had truly defeated Leo. That night, Satsuna turned to Giovanni. Giovanni commented that Satsuna didn't seem nearly as surprised as he expected. Almost as if he had been anticipating his arrival, Satsuna replied that it wasn't the first time something like this happened, and he was always prepared for any possibility. Giovanni acknowledged his attitude, noting that those with limited perspectives could not survive on the battlefield, but Satsuna possessed both exceptional combat skills and a sharp intellect. Satsuna then asked 2 questions: if Giovanni was one of the apostles and why he was doing this. Giovanni replied that after watching Satsuna fight in the internal contest, he had only one thought: what a beautiful specimen he wanted to get his hands on, Satsuna's corpse, and turn him into a zombie puppet just like Yuzura. Satsuna realized that Giovanni was behind Yuzura's transformation. Giovanni explained that Yuzura had strangely offered to be his guide. He had high expectations for her, but she was annoying, getting too close to him unnecessarily and taking his earrings without him suspecting a fool like her. Should consider it an honor to be turned into a living dead, Giovanni stated. Satsuna clenched his fists. His anger growing, he shouted at him. He promised to make Giovanni pay for everything he had done. The other students were exhausted from moving the stones and complained that they couldn't take it anymore. Finally, Drago managed to see Lila and was radiant. She was happy that he was okay. Drago thanked everyone for their hard work and said they just needed to find the exit of the dungeon. Layla mentioned that she had no idea where they were, but she also observed that the earthquake had stopped and the red light was now much weaker. Drago guessed that Setsuna had defeated the dungeon boss. Mifumento pointed out that the bracelet was reacting to her magic when Layla saw it too. She suggested they go up and find a place where teleportation would work. Drago asked Layla if she could take command. Since Setsuna hadn't returned yet, he needed to go down and check on him. Layla agreed and said they would wait for both of them outside. Drago thanked her and left. Meanwhile, Setsuna was furious with Giovanni and promised he would make him pay for what he had done. Giovanni replied that it's easier said than done. Furious, Setsuna tried to punch Giovanni, but Giovanni used Phantom Frost to turn into ice, and Setsuna's punch shattered it. Setsuna was stunned by the sight and suddenly felt a sharp piece of ice hit him. Giovanni stood at a distance, remarking that melee magic was a crude and inefficient branch of magic, only useful in close-quarters combat. He mocked Setsuna, saying he didn't think Giovanni would simply take a hit from such a pathetic attack. Setsuna realized Giovanni was the type to deceive his opponents and strike when they were off guard. He also understood that he had already spent too much mana fighting the Hydra and needed to end this fight quickly before he ran out of energy. He charged forward, thinking that Giovanni's magic worked in a very similar way to the formation magic that Mifumi used. There must be some kind of mechanism linked to how he teleported. As Setsuna prepared to attack again, the same ice reappeared to block him. He looked back and noticed a magic circle forming on the spot where Giovanni had teleported from. Another ice attack struck, and Setsuna realized his body was sluggish from the poison he had ingested earlier. After the attack, Giovanni taunted him, saying he was looking pathetic, and asking why Setsuna didn't just give up while he was ahead. Setsuna yelled at him to shut up, vowing he would never forgive Giovanni for what he had done and that he would break the curse he had placed on Yuzura. Giovanni replied, remarking that it seemed Setsuna knew exactly how to break the curse. Giovanni couldn't understand why Setsuna was so concerned about Yuzura, but explained it was her reward for successfully luring him there. He added that if Setsuna still wanted to undo the curse despite that, he had a suggestion. Giovanni grabbed Setsuna's hair and pulled it, telling him to simply pledge his loyalty to him. Setsuna, enraged, refused and attacked Giovanni once more. However, Giovanni appeared a short distance away, and Setsuna charged to attack him. Giovanni realized that Setsuna had figured out his magic. Setsuna's blow sliced off Giovanni's arms, but Giovanni remained calm, commenting that Setsuna was a fast learner. He regenerated his arms and stated that he needed to add Setsuna to his collection of the undead, although it seemed there was still much to teach him. Setsuna then realized that Giovanni was also one of the undead. Giovanni confirmed this, explaining that he was on the brink of death when Vidrak appeared and granted him the power of immortality. Giovanni was reborn as Vidrak's ultimate masterpiece. He considered humans to be fragile creatures that age and crumble to dust too easily, which he found pitiful. Giovanni believed it was his mission to introduce them to true happiness by giving those who deserved it an immortal body. He provoked Setsuna, saying that since he had no strength left to fight, he should just surrender. Setsuna felt weak, and his head grew foggy. He knew he needed to find a way to defeat Giovanni. Just as he felt his strength fading, he sensed someone's presence. Someone was coming. Giovanni began to recite dark magic over Setsuna, telling him he was at a loss for words. Finally, Setsuna realized the predicament he was in. Giovanni was about to start the ritual, but just as he began his chant, Drake appeared, throwing a rock at him from a distance, seizing the opportunity. Seth landed a punch on Giovanni, and the same ice magic appeared, but this time Seth felt that things were starting to work in his favor. He quickly leaped away from the magic circle, just as a sharp shard of ice shot towards him. Drake asked if Seth was all right, and Seth replied that Drake was like his savior. Drake noticed Seth's injuries, but Seth assured him that he was fine, and that he could still fight. He then asked about Miles and Sven, and Drake explained that everyone was making their way out of the dungeon, and that Layla and the other teams had met them on the upper levels of the dungeon. Seth thought that if Layla was with them, then he was certain they would be all right. Giovanni, on the other hand, wondered who dared to interrupt his ritual, clearly not expecting Drake. Drake asked if Giovanni was responsible for everything, and Seth confirmed it, telling Drake that Giovanni was responsible for everything happening in the dungeon, and that they needed to stop his rampage immediately. Drake furiously commented that it was unforgivable for Giovanni to have posed as an instructor all this time. Seth quickly explained Giovanni's fighting pattern to Drake, advising that they needed to be fast to dodge his attacks whenever Giovanni teleported. They should attack then, because he couldn't cast teleport continuously. Drake needed to strike first, and Seth would follow the same pattern and finish Giovanni. Seth noted that Giovanni's power had diminished significantly, so one more attack should be enough. Drake agreed to give it a try. Giovanni cursed the interruption, calling them annoying fools. As Drake attacked, ice magic shattered and Giovanni appeared at his teleportation spot. He warned them not to underestimate his magic, boasting that he could also cast the freezing spell. Seth seized the opportunity to punch Giovanni. Thinking this would finish him, he delivered a barrage of punches, forcing Giovanni against the wall, where he collapsed, gravely injured. Seth, already exhausted and on the brink of his limit, collapsed and passed out right after Giovanni, barely able to move, murmured that this was the last place he expected to use the item Valerius had given him. He then pulled something from his body, thinking of the Hydra, and preparing to merge with it. He turned to Drake, declaring that it wasn't over yet. Drake was shocked as Giovanni began to transform, becoming a monstrous creature. Giovanni scoffed, calling Seth and Drake arrogant children who had forced his hand. He claimed he had no other choice but to use the item Valerius gave him to deal with them, and promised they would live to regret it. Seth hadn't passed out completely, but he realized that if nothing was done, Giovanni would have his way. Now Seth also felt himself on the verge of losing consciousness when he saw a flare and remembered the headmaster's teachings on elemental magic, how it worked and what it was. Seth thought that this situation resembled the trance-like state that the headmaster had described. He could now feel the spiritual energy all around him. He extended his hand toward the flare, hoping the spirit would grant him the strength to help save everyone. Suddenly, the spirit made contact with him, telling him to stop making so much noise. The environment around Seth began to shift, and he saw stones floating in the air. The atmosphere was completely different from the dungeon. He wondered if he had been transported to a completely different place. Turning around, he saw a giant spirit wreathed in flames. He wondered if he had been transported to a different place. The spirit was not just a physical entity, but large enough to swallow Zane whole. With an extremely aggressive mana aura, its presence was overwhelming. Just by standing before it, Zane confronted the spirit, asking if it would hear his story. He explained that Vidrak and his subordinates were terrorizing humans in the mortal realm, and his friends were in great danger. He pleaded for the spirit's help. The spirit, however, was not pleased with his impertinence. The ground beneath Zane was suddenly destroyed, and the flames around the spirit intensified despite the distance. It felt as if his body was catching fire. The spirit decided to listen, but only to hear Zane speak without understanding his place. The spirit wondered why it should care about any of them. Before making 4 stones rise and surround Zane, Zane asked if the spirit was truly reluctant to help him. The spirit replied coldly, saying it had no interest in hearing the story. To Zane's dismay, the flames on the stones intensified, capturing Zane in a fiery grip. The flames around him were incredibly powerful. The spirit mocked him, saying that the area was once cold, but would now become a hellish inferno, reducing Zane to ashes. Zane knew that if he gave up, it would all be over. He had to find a way to communicate with the spirit. The spirit realized he was still conscious, something that would be impossible for a normal human who would have already succumbed long ago. Then, the spirit sensed the presence of the time spirit inside Zane. Zane screamed and pleaded with the spirit to listen to him. The spirit, noticing that Zane was still trying to resist, found him troublesome. It was hardly the one to deal with such a nasty monster from another world and its irritating sidekicks. Zane thought of the other world and wondered if the spirit knew Vidrak. Then Zane yelled that he would definitely defeat them, and that was why he was asking the spirit to lend him its power. The spirit intensified its glow, saying that defeating them was beyond Zane's capabilities. No matter how much he struggled, he would be trapped in the infinitely flowing space and doomed to spend eternity in the flames. Zane shot back that he didn't care and would never give up. The spirit paused, telling him to prove it, and then it unleashed hellfire upon him. Zane felt excruciating pain as his body burned. Unable to breathe, he couldn't feel anything else, but he refused to pass out. He wondered if Drago was all right and what was happening in the dungeon. What was Drago even doing there? It was too soon to give up, not when he hadn't defeated Vidrak yet. So Zane mustered his strength and asked the spirit to lend him its power so he could save everyone from Vidrak's clutches. The incredulous spirit remarked that it was unbelievable. No human could endure such flames, yet Zane desperately wished to protect the people on the outside. The spirit noticed that Zane was still on his feet, even after losing consciousness. It found this amusing. The spirit then told him to get out of its sight and go teach the villains a lesson. Finally, Zane received the spirit's power. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Drago was feeling a strange sense of satisfaction, thinking that his frenzied guard had not fully blocked Guido Vinicius's ice magic. Commented that it was impressive that a mere human had lasted so long, driven by his pride as a combat mage. However, Drago's struggles were useless, and Guido Vinicius smirked as he grabbed him by the collar. Drago felt his senses. As his limbs grew numb from the previous attack, Guido Vin declared he would finish Drago in a single blow, along with the friends he was trying to save. He would cut them to pieces. Then he hurled Drago against the wall. Drago realized he could no longer use the maniac guard, and he had no other techniques to defend himself from Guido Vin's attack. He thought of his parents, remembering how his father had praised him for using his sturdy, shield-like body to protect his friends. He recalled the true value of close combat magic. Drago now lamented that he was unable to protect his friends, as his father had hoped. Just as Guido Vin's attack was about to land, Drago realized he had no way to defend himself. But suddenly, he felt something unusual. To Guido Vin's surprise, he remarked that he hadn't expected Drago to last so long, asking himself if he had pushed too hard. Guido Vin looked around, realizing that Drago was no longer there. Then he saw Setsuna standing there with flares of fire all around him. Drago, feeling the heat nearby, asked if that was Setsuna. Guido Vin was shocked to see Setsuna's new form and was stunned when he suddenly vanished. In an instant, Setsuna delivered a powerful blow, throwing Guido Vin against the wall. Guido Vin wondered how a close combat mage could possibly use elemental magic. He also realized that his recovery speed was slowing down, and that the flames around Setsuna were unlike any he had ever seen. Then, Guido Vin saw another emblem on Setsuna's body. This meant that Setsuna had two different magic lines, which should have been impossible. He began to question if he was truly afraid of Setsuna. He screamed that it was impossible and then launched an attack, declaring that he was undead, someone who had conquered death. He unleashed a vortex of poison, believing that no living being could survive it. But Setsuna moved effortlessly, dodging the poison and simply pushing it away by releasing his mana. Guido Vin was shocked and wondered where Setsuna had obtained such power. The force radiating from Setsuna was overwhelming, and Guido Vin questioned what was happening. He realized Setsuna's power was so immense that he couldn't even control it properly, and he taunted Setsuna for losing consciousness during the battle. Guido Vin then struck Setsuna's back, expecting to injure him. However, Setsuna effortlessly dodged the attack. Guido Vin was perplexed, wondering how Setsuna managed to do it. Was he acting purely on instinct? If so, Guido Vin realized that as long as he could stop Setsuna's movements, he would win. Guido Vin then landed a direct hit on Setsuna, saying that now he wouldn't be able to move. He acknowledged that Setsuna's power was noteworthy, but in the end, he was just a human on a battlefield of dragons. Guido Vin vowed to cut off his head, declaring that being undead was far better than being human. At that moment, Lila arrived to stop him. She apologized for being late and declared that she would not let Guido Vin harm Setsuna any further. Still focused on Setsuna, He hadn't noticed her arrival, and now intended to finish her off quickly. Lila looked at Setsuna, and noticed he seemed to be losing consciousness, with his red hair and the flames still surrounding him. She wondered what was happening to him. She vowed to do her best to protect Setsuna. Meanwhile, Setsuna found himself back in the place where he had met the spirit. The spirit mocked him, calling him a pathetic human for being consumed by such weak flames. Setsuna retorted that the spirit didn't understand. He thought the two of them had already assimilated, and at that moment, he saw Layla's face. He asked the spirit how he could control the power and return to the real world. The spirit responded, telling Seth not to ask it but to find the answer for himself. It was the first time the spirit had granted its power to a human. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Layla was struck by Gideon's attack and fell to the ground. Despite her fall, she remembered the words Seth had told her before. As long as she had determination in her heart, even someone like her could become stronger. He remembered a lady stroking his head and saying, not to rush things, that as long as she settled her heart, she would certainly become stronger. As Lila struggled against Gideon's attack, the spirit grew excited, wondering if Layla's end would come along with Seth's. If that were the case, the spirit reflected, then it would be the one to end Seth's life. As soon as Gideon knocked Layla to the ground, Seth charged forward, unleashing the power of the flame spirit, a magical inferno directed straight at Gideon. Seth told Gideon that previously, he had mentioned that immortality was a blessing, but that humans have a limited time, so they have no choice but to work hard and grow. Seth reflected that it was on the brink of death when he mastered the fire spirit's magic. Gideon insisted it was impossible to achieve such power, but Seth defeated him. Layla, still recovering, called out to him, asking if he was really Seth. He nodded, telling her that now everything was fine. He approached her, thanking her for protecting him, and asked how her injuries were. She replied that she was fine and was happy to see that they were also okay. Drago, still surprised, commented that he never expected Lila to arrive. She explained that her superiors had managed to escape using teleportation magic, but she had a bad feeling, and decided to check on how they were doing. She told them to explain the situation to the teachers who were on standby, confident that help would arrive soon. Suddenly, Seth felt something strange and fainted. While the three of them were unconscious, the rescue team arrived. A woman observed that the three students from the close combat department were safe and alive, and she praised their efforts. A man helped Seth up, explaining that they heard the situation from Mifflin and came to their rescue. Seth asked them to take care of Lila and Drago first. Then he saw that they were also being carried away. Later, Seth woke up in a room and realized he was in the infirmary. He sat up, commenting that it seemed he was a frequent patient there. Even now, he could still feel the heat of the battle. Inside his body, Lionel entered the room, noticing that Seth was awake. As Lionel approached to sit down, Seth asked about the others. Lionel replied that Seth had been worrying about his friends even while being in a coma for 3 days. He assured Seth that Drago, Layla, and their senior from the formation department were fine, it seemed. Seth was the last one to wake up. Lionel explained that he heard Seth fought a powerful enemy and that the effects of the incident were resolved by the principal's orders. Seth thought it was good that there were still many things they didn't know yet. Lionel then apologized for the incident that he had heard about from the principal involving Leo. He mentioned that there were others like him, dangerous individuals, and that an internal investigation had been ordered. However, the investigation was postponed because of the recent events, and they failed to notice Gideon's ambition. Lionel expressed his regret that the students had been put in danger twice, and promised that such an incident would never happen again. As Lionel bowed his head in apology, Seth told him to raise it. He was about to say something when a sharp pain suddenly shot through his body. Lionel supported him, explaining that the pain was due to the side effects of using his mana beyond its limit. However, his injuries had already been healed, with healing magic, so there was no need to worry. Lionel added that it was probably thanks to the person who rushed to treat Setsuna. Setsuna wondered who that person could be. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Lionel said that the person had arrived on their own. The door opened, and it was Professor Zachary, holding peeled apples for Setsuna to eat. Lionel playfully patted Zachary on the back, telling him not to say anything and that he had something he wanted to say to Setsuna. Zachary, with a serious expression, apologized for how he had treated Setsuna during the orientation test. He explained that he considered the melee combat department the weakest. And despite that, the most irritating part was seeing someone like Setsuna there. Zachary revealed that he was once an honor student at the academy, but after realizing his only path was melee combat magic, his family and friends abandoned him. Upon hearing about Setsuna's choice, even though he was suited for any magical path, Zachary became irritated. He couldn't understand why someone like Setsuna would choose melee combat magic instead of any other path. However, Zakari's perspective changed after hearing a report. Setsuna's team had obtained the highest score in the joint training, and Setsuna had also recorded the highest score of all time in the Melee Combat Academy. Because of this achievement, the joint training with the Kingdom's Mage Battalion was cancelled. But Zakari was more pleased with the fact that Setsuna had proven that even the combat department could perform at such a high level. He extended his hand to Setsuna, thanking him for the demonstration. Setsuna thought to himself that Zakari was now a completely different person. He wondered if this was because his first impression of Zakari had been so bad. Setsuna then extended his hand for a handshake, saying that he also needed to apologize and thank Zakari for saving him. Zakari nodded and said he would see Setsuna in class before leaving. Afterward, Lionel took out a glove, saying that the headmaster had asked him to give it to Setsuna. He mentioned that it wouldn't be practical for Setsuna to always use bandages to cover his hand. The glove was designed for the spiritual magic emblem that Setsuna carried, an ancient magic emblem that no one had ever seen or heard of before. Setsuna asked if Lionel knew about spiritual magic. Lionel revealed that spiritual magic was also known as ancient magic, and it triggered the great magic war between mages 100 years ago, and everything related to it has been forbidden ever since. Lionel advised Setsuna not to use it in front of others, warning that if the Holy Church found out, it would be a disaster for him. Setsuna remembered what he had learned in history about the forbidden magic used during the Great Magic War 100 years ago. He never expected that the specific magic was spiritual magic. Curiously, he asked Lionel how he knew about it. Lionel replied that the headmaster had briefly explained the details to him about the evil god, his apostles, spiritual magic, and even about Setsuna regressing from the future. Only Lionel and the headmaster knew about this secret within the academy. Setsuna was relieved that Lionel knew about him but couldn't help but wonder if that had been the best option. Lionel reassured him, saying that he didn't care what kind of past Setsuna had in his previous life. What mattered now was that he was a student in the close combat department. Setsuna thanked him and then asked where the director was. Lionel explained that the director had found a clue about the apostles and would be away for a while pursuing that lead. Setsuna wondered what those clues were. Lionel stood up, saying that when the director returned, Setsuna could ask him about it. For now, he should rest, and when he recovered, Lionel had something else to tell him. Setsuna wondered what it could be. As Lionel left, Setsuna looked at his hand, thinking about the battle. He hadn't used the spirit's power. It could have ended badly for him. He managed to control that power thanks to Layla, but he wasn't confident he could do it again. He removed the bandages from his palm and looked at the mark on the back of it, thinking about the immense power it represented. A voice suddenly spoke, confirming his thoughts. It said not to think that a mere human like him could easily control the power of the spirit. Setsuna wondered if the voice came from the spirit itself, but as he looked around, he saw no one. Suddenly, something appeared from under the blanket he was using. With incredible speed, a pet-like creature appeared and placed itself on Setsuna's head. The creature spoke cheerfully, saying, "Rejoice! You have manifested me." Setsuna asked if it was really the spirit. The spirit confirmed it, noting that Setsuna had been rude to call it that, and then introduced itself as Blazer, asking Setsuna not to forget its name. Setsuna thought that even in this form, somehow Blazer's previous image didn't quite match it. Blazer jumped to the window to look outside, amazed at how incredible modern human society looked, with everything seeming so large. Setsuna thought this was because Blazer was small, and he asked if this was something special. Blazer replied that while human society might not be inherently special, it was providing it with a new perspective, and this was its first time in such a form. Setsuna was surprised, and asked why Blazer had taken this form. Blazer explained that it wasn't usually obligated to answer such questions, but would make an exception that day. It told Setsuna that they were connected through the crest, and to properly maintain its form, Blazer needed a certain amount of mana. However, if it remained in its original form, the mana of a mortal like Setsuna would be depleted quickly. That's why Blazer had taken on a smaller form. Seeing this as his opportunity to ask about the spirits, Setsuna asked if Blazer had been involved in the Great Magic War that occurred about 100 years ago, and what the outcome of that conflict was. Blazer's expression changed, and it answered nonchalantly that it didn't remember the details very well. It had just gone berserk during its contractor's war, and wasn't interested in the past. What it liked most was the present moment. Blazer then ran out of the room, and Setsuna hurried to follow it, calling for it to wait. Setsuna thought it wouldn't be good if the existence of a spirit was discovered by the Catholic Church, as they would both be sent to an inquisition. He needed to stop Blazer before that happened, so he rushed to catch up. Blazer had already left the building, and was looking around, attracting the attention of other students. Some wondered if Blazer was a dog, and the girls found it incredibly cute. Setsuna called out to Blazer, asking it to wait. Blazer looked back in surprise and asked why Setsuna was following it. Considering how weak his body was, it wondered if Setsuna was sure he could keep up. Setsuna thought that, if his body were in perfect condition, he'd show it what would happen next. As Blazer continued on, Setsuna chased after it and ran into Noel. Noel told Seth he was getting arrogant, thinking his victory in the exchange match was just pure luck. He warned that the golems under his command would now be able to resist any of Seth's attacks. Ignoring him, Seth simply continued on his way. Annoyed by his indifference, Noel scowled as he watched Seth depart. Just then, Cal appeared and, in a noble manner, forgave Seth for his previous rudeness. As Cal was about to speak about Lila, he saw Seth bluntly ignore him and walk away, which prompted him to comment that Seth was being disrespectful. Uninterested, Seth replied that he didn't understand what Cal was talking about, and advised him to just drop it. Cal, offended, muttered that Seth was acting in a terribly disrespectful way. As Seth walked on, Silas watched him from a hidden spot. Night was falling, and Seth arrived at a hall. Reluctantly accepting his defeat at the hands of Blazer, Seth was exhausted. Miles, noticing this, asked what had happened and why he was out of breath. One girl, talking to another, asked if Seth was the close-quarters combat mage who had trained with Miles during the joint training session. The second girl nodded, commenting that Seth had reached the top, thanks to Miles's help. Miles reprimanded them, telling them never to make fun of his friend again. After the girls left, Miles apologized to Seth, explaining that the atmosphere grew tense after he scored so high during the joint training. Even though he didn't understand the full situation, Seth admitted he never expected to be treated like a friend by Miles. Miles replied that in his eyes, everyone was worthy of being considered a friend. Seth noted that Miles had a unique personality. Miles then brought up the joint training again, mentioning Yara, who had fallen into a trap. Although her life wasn't in danger, the effects still lingered, and it seemed she was trapped by it. The culprit was now being interrogated by the professors. Seth wondered if they were talking about Giovanni, and grew suspicious of him. He then asked if Miles had seen a small, red animal around. Miles pointed, saying it had headed towards the courtyard. Seth decided they should go at once. In the courtyard, Blazer was playing with some flowers. The students were curious about what kind of creature Blazer was, as they had never seen anything like it before, and they wondered whose pet it could be. Hector, who was also watching, asked if it was a magic beast. Seth called out to Blazer, but when Hector saw him, he grew angry, thinking to himself that Seth was becoming increasingly irritating, especially after managing to destroy all the proof that he had manipulated the match during the exchange battle. Despite his efforts, a sharp-eyed professor had still noticed the discrepancies. Realizing that Blazer was Seth's pet, Hector decided to make his move, thinking that by accusing Seth of bringing a magic beast onto academy grounds, he could justify attacking it to ensure the school's safety. He intended to attack Blazer. He was confident the academy couldn't blame him for his actions. For a moment, Blazer seemed worried by the attack, but it quickly countered, unleashing a burst of fire. Hector was shocked to see this, and angrily told Blazer to know its place. However, the front of his clothes was scorched, and embarrassed, he quickly fled. Seth was relieved to see that Blazer was unharmed. However, he soon noticed the other students staring and whispering among themselves. Seeing Hector humiliated and witnessing Blazer's power firsthand, some students began to worry about what would happen if Blazer used its true abilities. Even in such a small form, it could pose a serious danger. One boy wondered about the flames, commenting on how incredibly powerful they were. Another questioned if so much fire had really come from one such a small creature. Blaze simply ignored them. He asked if they were all friends of that officer. The students, feeling intimidated, decided to leave. Meanwhile, Layla was observing Blaze closely. When Setsuna noticed, he backed away as she seemed lost in thought. Blaze asked what she was thinking, and if she wanted to be burned by him too. Setsuna thought that if it were Blaze, he would certainly burn her. As Layla approached, Blaze commented that it looked like she had already prepared herself. Layla then knelt to thank him for helping Setsuna in the dungeon, bowing in gratitude for saving her precious friend. Blaze acknowledged her good attitude. He told her to be grateful that he had linked his powers to Setsuna. Setsuna noticed that Blaze's moon had changed position. Layla then took some fruit from a basket and offered it to Blaze, mentioning that she had brought it for him while visiting Setsuna. Blaze began to eat, commenting that it was a good gift. He quickly added that it was not so bad, and that, in fact, he loved it. Setsuna thought to himself that Blaze was easily tamed. While the students were having their meal, Blaze sat on Layla's lap, eating his food. Drago commented on Blaze's incredible appetite and then asked Setsuna what kind of animal Blaze was. Setsuna replied that Blaze was a magical beast. He thought that if he revealed Blaze's true identity, as a spirit, the church would take notice. And even with Drago, he could not involve him in such a matter. For now, Setsuna still needed to remain vigilant, but Blaze did not seem to pose an immediate threat to the students. Noticing that Blaze had already finished Layla's food, Setsuna passed over his own, thanking Layla. She said nothing, and it seemed that Blaze was simply nervous about being surrounded by so many people. As a girl and a boy passed by, the girl mentioned that Setsuna was the close combat mage who had the highest score during the joint training. The boy then commented on Blaze, saying he had never seen an animal like that before. Blaze was about to eat Setsuna's food when he commented that an existence like his would attract a lot of attention. He added that, if it were just eager gossip, he would let them be. Setsuna thought to himself that Blaze was being treated like a rare animal. Blaze then told Layla that if she brought a gift like that, in the future, he would make her his subordinate. Setsuna was happy to be the only one who could understand and hear Blaze's voice in that way. Setsuna then called out to both Layla and Drago, thanking them for saving him in the dungeon. Layla replied that saving a friend was only natural. Drago, with his usual impassive expression, took something from his belongings. He showed them an envelope and explained that his parents had heard the news about his high score during the training. They were so happy that they even sent a letter, making him proud to be a close combat mage. Setsuna was pleased to hear this and smiled at the thought. Layla then called out to Setsuna, expressing her concern about Giovanni's true identity. Setsuna admitted that he did not know the details, but they could learn more. Once Yuzua's interrogation was complete, he remembered when they first met Giovanni, suspecting that he was an apostle. The only special ability Giovanni seemed to have was controlling the Hydra, and that power alone was something only an apostle could possess. Drago, with a serious expression, mentioned that he wanted to ask Setsuna about the power she demonstrated in the dungeon. He had seen the energy field. It was made with Setsuna's mana, which didn't seem like close-quarters combat magic. Setsuna hesitated, not knowing how to respond. Layla then speculated that Blazer had lent his powers to Setsuna. Blazer, upon hearing this, commented that Layla had a good eye, since she had sensed where the power was coming from. Setsuna realized that Blazer was completely tamed. She felt a bit empty herself, not knowing how to properly explain the situation. Suddenly, Professor Silas called out to Setsuna. As Silas approached, two other students wondered aloud if Silas was going to scold another student again. Silas shouted for them to get out, and they quickly obeyed. He then pointed to Blazer and asked what kind of animal he was, since he had never seen a magical creature like him before. He noted that it did not appear to be one of the forbidden magical creatures. Setsuna thought to herself that this was a bad situation. Silas continued his reprimand, saying she should have known she needed to register her pet with the academy. Blazer, hearing Silas call him a pet, grew irritated. Silas, noticing the reaction, asked if there was a legitimate reason for Blazer's presence. Otherwise, he would have to take measures to remove the animal. Blazer, now furious, was ready to retaliate, but before things could escalate, Zactri appeared, apologizing for the oversight. He explained that he had received the registration form but had carelessly forgotten about it. He bowed to Silas in apology. Setsuna understood that Professor Zactri was covering for her. Silas, visibly surprised, commented that a professor was lowering his head to a student, especially for someone like Setsuna, who had been the top and most honored student of the close quarters combat department. Silas found the situation quite embarrassing. Zactri, still bowing, acknowledged that it was, as Silas said. Drago, frustrated, slammed the table and stood up, walking towards Zactri. He then turned to Zactri and said with a smile that the reason the close quarters combat department finished first during the joint training was because of Professor Zactri. Setsuna and Layla approached Zactri to thank him. Setsuna thanked the professor sincerely, while Layla, despite his unconventional methods, expressed her gratitude, saying that everything he did was for them. Zactri, moved by their words, acted emotional but seemed to be enjoying the attention from the three of them. Silas, visibly irritated, asked aloud what foolishness they were all engaged in, and if they truly believed such a thing was so incredible. A girl turned to a boy and whispered that the combat department was currently ranked above Silas's department. The boy added that it was no wonder Silas was acting so high and mighty. Annoyed by their comments, Silas snapped back, telling them to just submit the document by tomorrow without further delay. Setsuna, relieved to have been saved from a worse situation, realized Blazer had been on the verge of losing his temper but hadn't gone too far. She then thanked Zactri for his help. Even though Zactri didn't know all the details, and appreciated that Zachary had backed them up. Zachary smiled and replied that he was the one who should be thanking Setsuna. He added that, considering the circumstances, he was sure there was a good reason for bringing the magical beast. Drago said with admiration that Zachary was a role model for the other professors. Layla agreed, but Blazer looked uninterested. She dismissed the conversation as useless. After that, Blazer and Setsuna left the area as they walked. A bird flew towards them carrying a scroll. Setsuna read it and discovered that it was a letter congratulating him on his success with spiritual magic. The letter also expressed concern, warning that the director was worried that Setsuna might have difficulties controlling the magic. While still recovering from his injuries, the director, wishing to teach him personally, was unavailable. He had arranged for someone else to instruct him in his absence. Setsuna wondered who that person could be and how they would help him control spiritual magic. The letter continued stating that Layla would introduce this person to him. The director ended by wishing Setsuna good luck. Setsuna felt grateful to the director for the support. The scene then shifted to a house where an elderly lady was reading a letter. She huffed, grumbling about how the content was meaningless. A girl was sweeping nearby with a bucket of water beside her. The old lady complained about having to teach another person to use spiritual magic. She was upset that the director had exposed her methods without her permission. She added that even though the boy Setsuna was recommended by the director, she would not forgive him if he proved to be incompetent. If that were the case, she would deal with him personally. The scene changed to the urgent magic conference, where Director Danhan reported what he had discovered. Someone even asked him if he thought that would be enough to solve the problem. Another person mentioned the signs of the emergence of the god of evil and the apostles of darkness, which made Danhan's words even more alarming. A woman noted that Danhan had no concrete evidence. Danhan replied that no evidence had been left behind by their enemies, and that was exactly why he came to them seeking help. Some could not accept this, while another person suggested that Danhan might have already forgotten something important. After the meeting, Danhan left the room to find Leon. Commenting on how the meeting had been chaotic, Lionel, who was there, said it was to be expected. Danhan sat down, acknowledging that it was understandable that they did not believe him, and did not highlight that they were dealing with forbidden spiritual magic, a subject that could not be easily discussed. Danhan responded that the fact that such an event had occurred could not be ignored, and that if the apostles acted, his proposal would at least be a step towards something useful. Danhan then asked about Setsuna's condition. Someone suggested that Danhan might have already forgotten something important. After the meeting, Danhan left the room to find Leon. Commenting on how chaotic the meeting had been, Lionel, who was there, said it was to be expected. Danhan sat down, recognizing that it was understandable for them not to believe him, and did not emphasize that they were dealing with forbidden spiritual magic, a subject that could not be easily discussed. Dan replied that the fact that such an event had occurred could not be ignored, and that if the apostles acted, his proposal would at least be a step towards something useful. Dahan then asked about the condition of Setsuna. Lionel explained that Setsuna was recovering well. Although he was still overexerting himself, it would take some time for him to fully recover. Dahan commented that Setsuna's new teacher would be quite strict. After all, he expected Setsuna to fully recover before meeting that person. Meanwhile, while Setsuna was sleeping, Carol sat beside him taking care of him. He woke up surprised to see her and asked why she was there. She replied that she had heard he was sick and came to bring food to help with his recovery. As she opened the food containers, she explained that the recipe was something Drago had taught her. Setsuna thanked her, especially for taking care of Blazer since the day before. She reassured him by saying it was no problem, mentioning that they had walked around the city together with Lila. She also brought some fruits to feed Blazer, whose voice was as cute as a key sound. Setsuna did not understand why others found Blazer so adorable. Carol commented on how amazing Lila was since she had treated Blazer without any trace of hostility. Setsuna asked if that was really true. Carol commented on how amazing Lila was as she had treated Blazer without any trace of hostility. Setsuna asked if that was really true, and Carol confirmed, saying that Lila did this as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She explained that treating someone without creating barriers is important, especially when doing something difficult like this. As Carol was always with her ghostly vacations, she could feel how much they appreciated being treated well. It is important, especially when doing something difficult like this. As Carol was always with her ghost vacations, she could feel how much they appreciated being treated. Gently, Seth remarked that this was typical of Lila, and he figured she had been taking care of him since the incident in the dungeon. He couldn't just remain passive throughout the ordeal, and as soon as his body fully recovered, he would need guidance on how to use spiritual magic. Carol then set the rest of the food aside and said she was leaving for class, asking him to be sure to bring Blazer back safely. Seth thought about how Carol and Layla were taking care of Blazer, while he needed to gather as much information as possible about spiritual magic. He had read in a book that 200 years ago, a great war had occurred when the followers of one individual tried to control other mages, and the two sides fought across the continents. The power of external magic was immense, but only a few mages could wield it, and in the end, the mages won, leaving the world in peace for the time being. The moment a user of ancient magic was discovered, they would be interrogated and eliminated, and the knowledge itself was considered too dangerous to be spread. This was why Seth needed to keep his contract with Blazer a secret. He lay down, thinking about how he had never encountered spiritual magic in his past life. If he could master this power, he would be one step closer to defeating the evil god. But he also thought about the events of his current life, the encounter with Leo during the exchange match and Giovanni's berserker during the joint training, neither of which had occurred in his previous life. If history was being altered, was he making the right choices? A few days later, the day came when Seth was fully recovered and ready to train with Lionel. Carol didn't look happy and asked if he was sure about this. He agreed, saying it was during the academy's vacation. Drago mentioned he would train hard so he wouldn't lose to Seth. Seth replied that he was looking forward to it. Layla was sad because she would have to be away from Blazer, and felt she would be lonely. Blazer asked her to prepare lots of fruit for when he returned. Seth thanked Carol and Layla for everything they had done for him and was now leaving. Carol and Layla wished for him to be careful. Lionel commented that Seth really had good friends. Seth agreed, thinking about how his main concern was Blazer. He worried if he could take care of Blazer by himself, he couldn't let Layla handle it all the time. The two arrived at the place where they would get the carriage, as the journey ahead was long. Seth suggested using the lizard carriage, but Lionel explained that mastering the art of riding them was difficult. However, it was the best option for long-distance travel, as all they needed to do was hold on to the lizard. The owner of the lizards said they were very fast, and the ride could be turbulent. He also warned that he wouldn't be responsible if any students got injured while riding one. Seth was fine with that, thinking it would depend on the lizard, and he identified with them. Seth easily mounted the lizard, thinking that, if he treated it naturally, it would respond well. As he settled in, he commented that it felt good. The man who owned the lizard applauded in surprise, apologizing for underestimating Seth due to his age. He explained that most people had difficulties, at first. Seth remembered riding similar creatures in his previous life. As Seth and Lionel departed, Blazer seemed to be enjoying the ride. Looking at Lionel's face, Seth asked if he was feeling sick. Lionel replied that he wasn't used to it yet. As they traveled, they noticed 3 armed women in their path. Something about them seemed different. They didn't look like common bandits. As Lionel suspected, one of the women confirmed they were fiends, servants of the witch Morgana. Seth recognized them. The name was written on the letter he had received from the headmaster. The woman then addressed him, identifying him as a spiritual magic mage, Lionel. He explained they were on their way to meet their master, and asked if the 3 of them had come to get them. At that moment, one of the women spoke in a tone completely different, saying she had no interest in meeting a mere close combat mage. The change in voice was so drastic that Lionel immediately asked if they were servants of Morgana. Seth dismounted, trying to figure out who they really were. Lionel calmly told him that these were not humans. Realizing this, Seth understood. They were dolls created through alchemy. One of the women looked at Seth and commented that he was probably chosen by a spirit by mere coincidence. If she was wrong, she challenged him to prove it by defeating them. Without hesitation, they launched an attack. When one of the women attacked Seth directly, he quickly raised his sword, blocking the blow. Meanwhile, Lionel had the lizard retreat and counterattacked with a powerful punch against their attackers. Seth analyzed the situation, realizing that for the dolls to possess such immense power, their master must be exceptionally strong. The woman smiled. Observing that Seth was in trouble as expected, she added that she had no obligation to teach a combat mage about spiritual magic. Lionel, angered by her arrogance, stated that she was looking down on them. He then summoned a giant sword, declaring that if she intended to fight seriously, he would do the same. Seth thought that, for Morgana to accept him, he would have to defeat the dolls. Lionel told Seth that they had no other choice, so they had to fight. The women attacked with a giant magic ball, and Seth, along with Lionel, reacted quickly. Lionel mentioned that they didn't need to dodge the attack, but should keep moving forward. He gave a signal to Seth and cut through it, and Seth realized how powerful the blade was. A woman then spoke, saying they seemed quite capable. As she did, the 3 women advanced to attack once more. Seth noticed that their weapons were charged with electricity. One of the women swung her weapon at Seth, and he managed to dodge in time. Another woman aimed a bolt of black lightning at Seth and Lionel, and the 2 of them jumped to avoid it. The 3rd woman was about to attack when Lionel warned Seth that if the attack hit them, they would be electrocuted. Seth understood and jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding the spread of electricity. Morgana observed that if they were weak against elemental magic, they would eventually be overcome and dominated by mages who couldn't defend against such attacks. Seth thought about why close combat mages were weak against elemental attacks. If the attack hit them, their bodies would suffer the consequences, while those who used external mana would take less damage. This made it nearly impossible for close combat mages to withstand such attacks. Morgana commented that even modern mage armies still used golems or summoned beasts to fight on the front lines. She claimed that close combat mages were relics of the past, and that Seth and Lionel would not be able to defeat her hounds in combat. Seth replied that it was true that close combat mages had fallen out of use, but that didn't mean they had no potential. He dodged to get closer to one of the women, saying that close combat magic still had its place. With that, he delivered a powerful punch. Meanwhile, Lionel was fighting the second woman, and when he saw an opening, he punched her in the back, explaining that he hadn't destroyed her, just incapacitated. While the women continued fighting with Setsuna, Lionel dodged attack after attack. Setsuna focused and began to channel power into his hand. He thought carefully, imagining the strongest weapon he could create in this situation. When one of the women attacked him with her weapon, he jumped to dodge, and then used a nearby tree branch to launch himself into the air and deliver a powerful kick from behind. Morgana, watching this, commented that they were altering the structure of the mana blade and trying to use the environment to their advantage. That could be created in this situation. When one of the women attacked him with her weapon, he jumped to dodge and then used the branch. Lionel was also fighting against another woman. Setsuna noticed that her strikes were aimed at hitting Lionel's opponent and thought about how his trained body, combined with his technique and mana control, was making all of this possible. If they used their abilities correctly, they would not lack in close combat. Commented that they were altering the structure of the mana blade and trying to use the environment to their advantage. Lionel was also fighting against another woman. An attack hit the ground, and Lionel quickly jumped back. The three women joined hands, and Morgana sent a message implying that no surprise attack would work against them. She wondered how they would manage to break through the elemental magic at close range. Combined with his technique and mana control, was making all of this possible. If they used their skills correctly, they would not lack in hand-to-hand combat. The women conjured a magic ball, and Setsuna thought that if they didn't attack him directly, he might be able to break it with a charged bullet. However, his firepower would certainly decrease due to the water magic they were using. Blazer suddenly appeared, claiming that breaking the magic was easy. He said that if they used their power, they could even destroy the entire forest, implying that no surprise attack would work against them. She wondered how they would manage to break the elemental magic. Setsuna's elemental magic was activated, waves of energy surrounding him. Blazer praised him for maintaining focus, and was now going to increase the firepower to take them down. As Blazer increased the intensity, Setsuna felt a sharp pain and asked him to stop. Blazer paused, asking why Setsuna was hesitating. He didn't want to defeat the three women. He might be able to break it with a charged bullet. However, his firepower would certainly decrease. Setsuna explained that although he wanted to win, this was a test of his own strength. Blazer said he was being ridiculous. At that moment, the magical barrier disappeared, and Morgana instructed her maidens to bring Setsuna to her. Lionel, confused, wondered what had just happened. The women apologized for their rudeness and asked him to follow them. They could even destroy the entire forest. Setsuna's elemental magic was activated, waves of energy surrounding him. Blazer praised him for keeping his focus. Finally, they arrived at a large house where Morgana was waiting alongside a girl. She called Setsuna by name, and he realized it was Morgana. She asked why he hadn't used spiritual magic in the battle against a shield made of water. His close combat magic would have been ineffective, and using it could have failed. Asking why Setsuna was hesitating, he did not want to defeat the three women. Setsuna explained that although he wanted to win, this was a test of his own strength. Setsuna replied that it was exactly as she said, but he needed to hide his spiritual magic at all costs. That's why he chose not to use it against enemies he didn't know. Moreover, if he had used spiritual magic in that situation, the entire forest would have burned, and destroying nature and harming animals for no reason was something he wanted to avoid. Setsuna, even Lionel, confused, wondered what had just happened. The women apologized for their rudeness. Morgana commented that Setsuna was very sensitive, but she praised him for not forcing himself to use spiritual magic when he still couldn't control it. If he had used it in that situation, he would have failed. However, she would guide him on how to control it. She called Setsuna by name, and he realized it was Morgana. She asked why he had not used spiritual magic. Setsuna lowered his head in gratitude. Blazer, observing the exchange, wondered if Morgana was serious about controlling him. It seemed like a joke. Morgana replied, saying that although Setsuna was strong, no matter what she saw, he was still an unrefined beast. Blazer responded that he would show her his true form. He began to grow slightly. Satsuna replied that it was exactly as she said, but he needed to hide his spiritual magic at all costs. That was why. He chose not to use it against enemies he did not know. Besides, if he had used spiritual magic in that situation, the entire forest would have burned, and destroying nature and harming animals for no reason was something he wanted to avoid. Morgana commented that Setsuna was very sensitive, but she praised him for not forcing himself to use spiritual magic when he still could not control it. If he had used it in that situation, he would have failed. However, she would guide him on how to control it. Setsuna bowed his head in gratitude. Blazer, observing the exchange, wondered if Morgana was seriously talking about controlling him. It seemed like a joke, Morgana replied, saying that although Setsuna was strong, it did not matter what she saw. He was still an unrefined beast. Blazer replied that he would show her his true form. He began to grow slightly, and Satsuna realized that Blazer was forcefully absorbing his mana. Blazer declared that he would burn everything, even her bones if necessary. Satsuna panicked, realizing that she couldn't control Blazer's power, and if this continued, everything would be reduced to ashes. Morgana reassured him, saying that there were no other humans living in the forest, which made it easier for her to control the situation. However, she wouldn't let Blazer burn everything. With that, she summoned her spirit, declaring that she would show Setsuna how a true spirit should be controlled. Blazer attacked her with a fireball, but when it hit Morgana's body, it turned into water, and she regenerated effortlessly. She declared it was time to end the battle. Using her power, she summoned a great wave of water from the lake, leaving Lionel in shock. The water rushed towards Blazer, extinguishing its flames. Morgana stated that the spirit had only formed a weak bond with Setsuna, making its power insufficient. It was nothing more than a wild beast. However, if Setsuna managed to establish a true bond with his spirit, he would be able to control its manifestation and power freely. He contemplated the idea of mastering nature to such an extent. After the battle, Morgana explained that there are 3 stages of mastery in spirit magic. The first stage is becoming one with nature. The second is entering the spirit world at will to confront the spirit and gain its genuine recognition. She had heard that Setsuna had forced a contract without even properly completing the first stage, which is why his spirit magic was incomplete. Frustrated, Morgana scolded Darren, calling him a brat and accusing him of not teaching Setsuna correctly. Setsuna was surprised how Morgana could refer to the director in such a way. Morgana then revealed that the forest was home to many spirits, making it the ideal place to achieve a state of selflessness. The next day, Setsuna's training would begin. Morgana asked him to demonstrate the qualities that led the spirit to choose him. He agreed, and the next day, she watched him meditating in the forest all day long. He not only practiced diligently with the others, but also helped with chores and kept the house clean. One night, while training near the lake, several bright lights began to descend around him. He immediately understood that he was in the presence of nature itself. Looking at the house perched on the cliff, he murmured to himself that he was now ready to face Blazer. When they gathered back in the house, Morgana commented that it seemed Setsuna had sensed the spirit's presence and reached this stage in just 2 weeks, an impressive feat. She explained that from this point on, he would need to enter the spirit world and form a bond with the spirits. However, she revealed that in the spirit world, magical power was insignificant, and only a person's true strength mattered. Even though Setsuna had gained the ability to perceive spirits, facing Blazer alone would still be too much for him. Morgana decided she would accompany him. Blazer acknowledged the unusual circumstances, but remained skeptical, questioning if Morgana truly believed she could challenge it in the spirit world. She warned Setsuna not to get too full of himself. Setsuna calmly replied that all he needed was Blazer's approval. Morgana then turned to Lionel, explaining that while they were in the spirit world, their physical bodies would be completely defenseless. Since this place was her sanctuary, protected by her servants, she entrusted their protection to Lionel. Lionel agreed, assuring them that he and the others would protect their bodies while they were away. Morgana suggested they begin and instructed Setsuna to first reach a state of self-denial. As soon as he did, the door to the spirit world would open. Setsuna followed her guidance, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself face to face with Blazer, with Morgana by his side. Morgana commented on Blazer's arrogance. It wasn't without reason. Zane realized that because he couldn't perceive the spirits, he had failed to grasp the true extent of Blazer's power. Blazer, noticing the change, commented that it looked like Morgana was finally taking this a bit more seriously. She then created a barrier. She explained it was to protect Zane from Blazer's will, lamenting that if Zane confronted him directly, he might be left behind in the spirit world. Blazer scoffed. He told Morgana not to get ahead of herself, questioning if she truly believed she could control his power with such a weak resolve. Zane, now enraged, retorted that he had trained in magic control more than anyone else. Since spiritual power followed the same principles, he had mastered it as well, and now that he had reached a state of selflessness, he believed nothing could stop him. If Zane wanted Blazer's approval, there was still a way to prove himself, but Blazer warned him not to regret bringing such a burden upon himself. Meanwhile, Lionel and a girl were in the house watching the situation unfold. Lionel commented that it seemed Zane had begun, and he was confident that Zane would manage. However, he then sensed a dark power approaching. Something malicious was heading towards their hideout, and at such a critical moment, he couldn't let anyone interrupt the battle between Zane and Blazer, and a dark aura began to surround him. Leo entered the room, apologizing before asking if anyone was home, and his eyes landed on Lionel. He wondered if Lionel was from the close quarters combat department. To his surprise, he also spotted Zane, which would save him some trouble. Lionel, recognizing Leo, mentioned that he was the runaway student, the very one they had been looking for. To think that Leo had come to find them. Suddenly, Zagan burst into the room, destroying a wall and striking a doll. Calling them rookies, he declared that he would take both the old lady and Zane. Leo, surprised by Zagan's intentions, reminded him that they used to be best friends. He asked if Zagan couldn't be content with just the lady and the doll. Lionel immediately realized that Zagan was also an apostle. He grimaced, noting that they had arrived at the worst possible time. If he weren't a teacher, he would have fled. Leo, noticing the tension, told Lionel that he could leave if he wanted, since they weren't after him. However, Lionel, unwilling to back down, created a swordsman, telling Leo not to mock him. He explained that, at their academy, there was no teacher who would abandon their students. With that, he charged forward to attack. Blazer told Zane that he claimed he would make him acknowledge him, but he believed those claims were just empty words. Zane thought to himself not to get carried away, as this was a world where willpower meant everything, and he needed to keep his heart strong. Zane looked at Morgana, unsure of what was happening. She replied that something was wrong in the real world. An evil presence was invading the forest, and it seemed her servants had already been subdued. Zane was worried, but he encouraged Morgana to go on ahead. Morgana warned that if she released the barrier, Zane could be burned by the spirit's will, and might not be able to return to the real world. Zane ignored her warning, saying that the challenge he had to face should be faced alone. He asked her to take care of the professor and the servants. Blazer gave a final warning, telling Zane to turn back, as it wouldn't be worth it if he died there. After all the guidance he had received, Zane reassured Morgana, saying that he would return. Seeing his determination, she removed the barrier so he could leave. He apologized to Blazer for making him wait. Blazer then asked why Zane desired his power so much, noting that it was far beyond his reach, and wondering if he was willing to get burned for it. Zane replied that he had lost everything in the world before his regression. Blazer paused. Realizing this was the landscape of Seth's mind, Seth continued, explaining that the magic army had been manipulated by the apostles, and that the world had collapsed and could not be rebuilt. His mentors had all been taken from him, and this regret awakened the power of the spirit of time to send him back. Now he vowed he would not let anyone take anything from him again. Blaze, intrigued, wondered if Seth's motivation was revenge against those who destroyed the world, or perhaps a challenge. He thought it was a beautiful display of human motivation, but to face such despair without fear, that was madness. And Seth was certainly an interesting person. Blaze acknowledged that Seth was worthy of facing a challenge, but what he desired was not just a part of his power, but all of it. With that, Blaze assumed a smaller, more human-like form, and said it would not be a test of individuals like before, but a trial established by Blaze himself. Seth wondered if this was a clash of wills and lunged forward to attack Blaze. Blaze responded in kind, and they both charged, with their hands colliding in the spiritual world. Back in the real world, Lionel was in battle against Zagan. He managed to cut part of Zagan's feather, and Zagan commented that Lionel was quite decent for a human. As they fought, Zagan noticed the use of alchemy magic, and suddenly stood up, shouting for everyone to get out of the way. Just as Zagan was about to attack, a doll appeared, taking the blow in his place. Morgana then pulled Leo out of the house, breaking through the wall to escape the attack. Lionel thought to himself that, after repeatedly using such grand techniques, Zagan should be exhausted, so how was it possible that his mana was getting stronger? Zagan, noticing his confusion, told Lionel not to relax. Lionel agreed, and was about to attack, but Morgana intervened, using her magic to block the attack. She wondered aloud how they could be so noisy in someone else's house, realizing that Morgana had finally awakened. Lionel asked if he could at least have one break. Morgana replied that the young should try harder as Zagan prepared to attack. Her Lionel rushed in and hit him with a blow. Zagan, using his power, blocked Lionel's strike, and Morgana sensed he was disintegrated. Leo wondered if this was the spirit magic from the report, and apologized for not realizing sooner that it was useless when Zagan was about to attack again. Lionel punched him, but Zagan backed away, telling him to keep it in check. Zagan landed a blow on Lionel, sending him flying out of the house. Morgana, watching Zagan's movements, wondered if his ability could nullify all magic, allowing him to avoid any attack. She questioned if this was a special technique, or if there was some kind of prerequisite for it. Morgana considered hitting him with magic at close range. Hoping that the lack of time to react would make her attack more effective, she then made the lake's water swell to enormous proportions, preparing to unleash it upon them outside. Leo realized that Morgana was aiming directly at him from under the ground, but he was not worried as he used his power to defend himself. He thought that if this did not work, she would have no choice but to use her trump card. Morgana raised the water even higher, planning to envelop him in it and swallow them both. Leo, realizing her intentions, commented that this was overkill, but not a bad plan. He used his power to strike the water, pushing it away and making it rain down in torrents. He commented that he had also trained a little. Morgana, impressed, asked if he was using long-range magic, combined with disintegration. Leo confirmed, asking if this would be enough of a souvenir for the underworld. With that, he prepared to attack, claiming his mission was complete. But before he could strike, Setsuna suddenly rushed in, throwing a punch. Morgana immediately understood that Setsuna had defeated the spirit. Zagan observed Setsuna, who was surrounded by intense flames but skillfully controlled them, ensuring they didn't spread through the forest. Zagan, noticing Setsuna, remarked that he was different from Leo. Blazer asked if they were opponents worth fighting, worth burning. Considering the situation, Setsuna stated with determination that they were strong opponents, but he couldn't let his guard down. Blazer reflected on their previous match, acknowledging that Setsuna had won, but with a humble attitude, an attitude that didn't seem to suit him. Setsuna reminded Blazer of their battle in the spirit world, where Blazer had punched him, making him stagger backward. Both were exhausted, and Blazer admired Setsuna's incredible willpower. He noticed that, despite trembling, Setsuna kept smiling, even though his face showed signs of strain. He remained resolute, believing he would defeat Blazer. As Blazer prepared to attack, he commented that Setsuna had a confidence remarkable for such a weak human. Setsuna commented that Blazer was indeed strong, which explained his undefeated record, but that very strength was also his weakness. Setsuna commented that Blazer was truly strong, which explained his undefeated record, but that this same strength was also his weakness. Blazer was confused by what Setsuna was saying, and Setsuna explained that he had faced defeat and despair many times before. However, having hit rock bottom, he now knew how to rise again. No matter how difficult things became, his spirit would not break, and his willpower would carry him to victory. He readied himself to strike, declaring that this would be Blazer's first defeat. Blazer, rising to his feet, declared this would be Setsuna's final defeat. With all their might, they clashed. After some time, Blazer was impressed with Setsuna's strength, admitting that Setsuna had surpassed his expectations. He now recognized that Setsuna had won. He wondered when Setsuna had become strong enough to guarantee victory. Setsuna replied that in the middle of the battle, he felt his own willpower growing, and the intensity of Blazer's determination felt like a raging fire that began to flow into him. Blazer realized it had happened without him even noticing. He recognized Setsuna as a worthy ally, someone he could entrust with his power. He asked Setsuna to take his hand. They bumped fists, and Setsuna thanked him for entrusting him with his power. Blazer replied that no thanks were necessary, and urged him to go. Setsuna understood, and without another word, he turned to face Zagan. Laganal warned Setsuna to be careful of Zagan's claws. Setsuna replied that they steal the magical power from anything they touch. He thought to himself that Zagan was the only apostle he had faced before his regression, and his authority was the devourer of all. Although Zagan could nullify attack magic, he could also absorb the mana from anyone who attacked him. Zagan was the powerful entity who had single-handedly annihilated the Northern Kingdom, a place renowned for its advanced alchemical equipment, all while he stole its magical power. Zagan, noticing Setsuna's knowledge about his authority, commented that he didn't know how Setsuna had learned of it, but it didn't matter, as he could never win. Leo, trying to regain his composure, winced in pain and noticed that Setsuna was much faster than before. Setsuna was surprised that Leo was still on his feet and wondered if he had lessened the impact using magic integration. Realizing that Leo had grown even stronger, Zagan told Leo that he would deal with Setsuna himself and ordered him to fall back and watch. Leo agreed. Stepping back to observe, Setsuna reflected that, before his return, he had managed to defeat Zagan by exploiting his advantage in long-range magic. But now, Zagan's specialty was close-quarters combat, and a single blow could be fatal. Setsuna had also changed. He blocked Zagan's attack and delivered a side punch, forcing Zagan to retreat. But Setsuna didn't stop. He pressed the attack again. A shocked Zagan declared that it was impossible for Setsuna to be faster than him. Setsuna thought to himself that by combining the power of his blaze with his own physical enhancement, he could move much faster. Leo realized that Setsuna was now combining combat techniques for close-quarters combat with spirit magic, allowing him to move even faster and land multiple blows on Zagan. Morgana marveled at Setsuna's skill in controlling the range of his fire attacks with such precision in so little time, a truly impressive feat. Zagan let out a loud roar that created immense pressure on everyone around him. He then taunted Setsuna, saying that covering his body in flames was basically asking to be absorbed. He declared that he could now feel the overwhelming power, for he was the devourer of all things. Setsuna smiled, thinking to himself that he was also curious about that. Zagan charged towards Setsuna, hitting him. However, he did this to get closer to the tree, and as Zagan attacked, Setsuna skillfully dodged. Suddenly, Zagan felt as if his body was burning. He called out to Morgana, asking her to use her water magic on him. His body froze in place, and he wondered what was happening. Setsuna calmly explained that, as he had suspected, Zagan couldn't completely devour spirit magic. Even if he absorbed it with his power, it was useless if he couldn't wield it properly. Instead, it was consuming him from the inside. Spirit power was not something Zagan or any being like him could easily devour. Zagan screamed at Setsuna, accusing him of doing it on purpose. He then turned to Leo, demanding that he disintegrate the magic inside his body. Leo replied sarcastically, pointing out that Zagan had told him to just watch earlier, and now he was fine. With Leo interfering, Leo attacked Zagan, and Zagan was puzzled, wondering what Leo was doing. The attack even hit Morgana. In the process, Zagan finally realized that Leo had betrayed them. Leo responded by saying he prioritized the mission and dealt with Morgana, because his former superior was useless. He added that Zagan's keen sense of smell had been useful for locating Morgana, but his beastly nature had become unbearable. Leo did what needed to be done. Furious, Zagan shouted that he would never forgive Leo, and promised to take them all down with him. For the sake of his master, he would kill them all. As Zagan prepared to attack, Setsuna used his spirit flame magic, slicing through the air with an infernal slash. Zagan responded by spitting a stone from his mouth, but it was destroyed in the attack, and Zagan was killed. His body turned to ash. Setsuna looked at the black gemstone left behind, then called out for Leo. Realizing he had already escaped, he muttered Leo's name, vowing to take him down no matter where Leo was. Setsuna would find him and defeat him without mercy the next time they crossed paths. Morgana collapsed, and Setsuna rushed to her side, telling her to hang on, and promising to treat her immediately. However, she explained that the opponent had used disintegration magic, and her body couldn't be saved. Both Leo and Setsuna were deeply saddened by the news. Morgana, with a faint smile, told them not to be sad. She acknowledged that Setsuna was a close-quarters combat mage, recognized by the spiritual flame, and that she had something to entrust to him. She handed him a tool that contained her spirit, explaining that if he used it, it would be useful for him to understand the speed of water in the sea. She entrusted this to Setsuna. Shaken, he begged her not to speak as if she were leaving a memento. He refused to accept that there was no way to save her. But Morgana had already passed away, and Setsuna gently placed her on the ground, his heart heavy. He whispered to himself that it didn't matter how strong he became if he couldn't protect those important to him. Then what was the point? Lionel approached, trying to console him. He explained that life was uncertain, and no one knew what would happen next. No matter how strong someone was, humans were imperfect. The most important thing was to continue facing challenges without giving up, and as long as they were alive, they should continue fighting. Lionel hoped that Setsuna could understand this. Soon after, a girl approached and gave a pat on Setsuna's head. She joked that he had been fooled, and warned him not to say things like memento, because it brought bad luck. To his shock, she declared that she was the real Morgana. Both Setsuna and Lionel were stunned. Morgana explained that the old woman he had seen before was actually an alchemical doll, just like the other servants. However, unlike the others, Morgana had incorporated her soul into the doll, and because of that, all her emotions and powers resided in that old lady. She teased Setsuna, calling him a fool and saying that it was simply a matter of experience. Lionel, still in disbelief, wondered if the old lady was just a disguise. Morgana confirmed that she was, mentioning that the old woman was the alchemist's masterpiece. She asked if everyone was surprised by the revelation. Setsuna, still trying to process everything, admitted that he had never seen such a realistic doll. He remembered that even in the spirit world, she had appeared as the old woman. Morgana replied that in the spirit world, appearances could be changed at will. Lionel asked if it wasn't a bit much to say that she was Morgana. Morgana revealed her pointed ears, confirming that she was indeed an elf. She explained that elves had a much longer lifespan than humans, and asked Setsuna to guess her age. Lionel turned to Setsuna, asking him to try, since he was good at that sort of thing. Setsuna, however, refused immediately, knowing it was a trap. There was no right answer to the question. Morgana laughed and revealed the correct answer. She was 300 years old. Setsuna commented that they hadn't answered in digits, then asked if that meant she had also been involved in the Great Magic War. Morgana smiled, asking if he was interested in the war. She said she could tell him about it, but there would be a price. Setsuna, always ready for information, said he had something to offer in return. Morgana laughed, telling him not to take it so seriously. She assured him it wasn't about money and that it wasn't safe to talk there. She suggested they move to the lake, where they could discuss the erased history in peace. Upon arriving at the lake, Morgana picked up a stone and threw it into the water. She tried to skip it, but on her third attempt, the stone sank, and she became frustrated for not breaking the 90-year-old record. Setsuna turned to Lionel and asked if he was the only one who couldn't keep up with her. Lionel replied that he was in the same situation. He speculated that Morgana must be under a lot of stress. Morgana sighed and suggested they get back to the story of the Great War. She explained that, as they knew, the world was inhabited by various races. Humans, dwarves, beastmen, and others, among them the elves, had a longevity that could be considered eternal. The elves preferred to live in nature and often had the opportunity to interact with spirits. This connection allowed them to master spirit magic. The elves and spirits, sometimes revered by humans, were not always seen in a positive light. Some strayed from their paths. While being worshipped, one of these elves manipulated the king of a nation that adored him, teaching spirit magic to those who followed him. This elf waged a war to conquer the world. Setsuna wondered if this was the Great Magic War. Lionel added that the combination of blind faith and power can be incredibly dangerous. Morgana continued explaining that after many sacrifices on both sides, the followers of the elves and spirits were defeated since then. The elves were persecuted as beings who disturbed people's minds. Setsuna realized that the term ancient magic had been coined to hide the fact that there was magic capable of dealing with spirits. Morgana confirmed this and explained that this was the reason for the term Lionel. Still processing everything, asked Morgana if she resented humans for what they had done to the elves. She answered that she once did, but not anymore. Lionel was curious if she still held any resentment. Morgana said that, although she no longer resented humans, she still kept her distance from them. Since the Great War, there were still those who sought the lives of the elves. Even after 200 years, the legacy of hatred remained for this reason. She used a dual identity to hide her true form. Setsuna asked why she had revealed her true self. To them, Morgana explained that it was because Dan trusted Setsuna, and Setsuna proved he deserved that trust. Besides, she heard him crying and felt it was time to show her true self. Setsuna quickly corrected her, saying that he had not cried. He reflected on the Great Magic War, thinking that the elves used spirit magic and managed to defeat one of the apostles. However, the great power that came with this responsibility required the use of forbidden magic, which led to many sacrifices. The three of them then began to restore and clean the forest, repairing the damage they had caused. After everything was finished, it was time to part ways. Morgana thanked them for cleaning the area. Setsuna responded with gratitude, saying he was happy to have met her. Lionel asked her what her plans were after this. She replied that since her whereabouts had been discovered, she would have to hide somewhere else, and they would probably never meet again. Setsuna called out to her, asking if when humanity was in danger, he could count on her power. He bowed and humbly asked for her help. Morgana replied that he was being very persistent, but when the time came he should just ask Dan. She occasionally exchanged letters with him. Setsuna thanked her for that. Suddenly Blazer appeared, mocking, telling Morgana not to. I think she could get away with a little training, and that next time he would reduce her to ashes. Morgana waved a little water in front of him, asking if Blazer wanted to get wet again. He simply turned his face away, and they said their goodbyes, each waving as they went in different directions. Setsuna mounted his lizard. Remembering a rainy day from the past, when he was outside a building, a woman came to him with an umbrella and a towel, saying that just because Setsuna had gained great power, it didn't mean he had become a strong person. Confused, Setsuna asked her to explain, and she said that great power sometimes drives people mad. It was much more important to use power correctly, without arrogance, and without being controlled by it, and only to increase one's own strength. Now, as Setsuna rode away, he realized that he understood the meaning of that woman's words. He was determined to use the power of the spirits wisely, and for the sake of justice. With Lionel by his side, they returned to the academy. The scene changed to Satan and Puka. Satan told Puka they were ready and should begin. Leo was standing there, and Puka commented that he failed to kill Setsuna and even threw away his comrade. Wasn't that a dereliction of duty? Leo denied it, asking Puka to spare him, explaining that he had completed the mission of killing Morgana. Satan asked if Leo had checked to confirm Morgana's death. Leo hesitated, admitting that with that level of attack, Morgana was surely dead. Satan wasn't having it, and sternly reminded Leo that he was ordered to ensure Morgana's death, not Setsuna's. He added that Leo should have at least brought back Zagan's body. If he had done that, at least they could have recovered something. Satan could have created an undead creature capable of using Zagan's power. Leo explained that Setsuna had knowledge of Zagan's power, which wasn't in the original intel. Satan replied that this didn't excuse his failure and that they needed to re-evaluate their understanding of Setsuna. He believed Setsuna was hiding something. Puka, intrigued, asked if Leo's zombie toy had also been destroyed. He then recognized a figure in the distance, Giovanni. Satan called out to Tsukuyomi, asking if she could handle the situation. She replied that she had no other choice, as it was almost time. Tsukuyomi, the eighth apostle, had the power to resurrect the dead. Setsuna and Lionel were traveling under a beautiful sky. Lionel mentioned they were about half a day from the academy. Setsuna wondered how everyone was doing. Lionel, concerned, commented that Drago was probably overtraining, and Setsuna agreed, wondering when he had started to care about those around him. Lionel asked if things were different before. Setsuna agreed, saying he used to only focus on training himself. He believed that by pursuing the pinnacle of long-range magic, he could win every battle alone, without anyone's help. Those around him served merely as encouragement. He had few friends. However, things were different now. He had trustworthy comrades with him. Moreover, he had learned that there were various forms of strength in other magical systems, beyond just long-range magic. The magical control he had cultivated before his return also proved useful for close-quarters combat. He explained that magical control was a skill mastered through training, not just talent or aptitude. He believed that Setsuna's level of mastery wasn't something he achieved in just a few years. He thought that Setsuna probably went through years of rigorous training, which explained why he became the strongest in the world. Lionel speculated that Setsuna must have had an unimaginable past. After some time, they stopped for a break, and Setsuna took out the items he had received from Morgana. He read a note, and understood that it would certainly be useful, deciding to use it when the time came. Blazer was examining the necklace, mentioning that he could feel the presence of a water spirit. Setsuna knew that Morgana had given him the necklace to establish contact with the water spirit. He focused, calling out to the spirit, wondering if she. At that moment, the locket called his name in surprise. Setsuna was told not to be startled, as the spirit had been watching all along with Morgana. The spirit explained that if Setsuna could overcome her trial, she would be happy to lend him her power. Setsuna wondered if it was real, but the spirit reminded him not to celebrate just yet. The trial would certainly take place in battle, which reminded him of the upcoming battle with Blazer. The water spirit reassured him that he didn't need to be tense, since his trial was meant to challenge him and help him grow. Seth wondered what he needed to move forward. The spirit explained that she was tired of the spirit world and wanted to experience a new perspective. Blaze was surprised. He commented on how tolerant the spirit was, adding that it was typical of him not to get along with her. The spirit replied that she didn't dislike Blaze at all. Seth thought it was good that unlike Blaze, the spirit was friendly, but he still wondered what she meant by moving someone. Lena placed her hand on Seth's shoulder, telling him he was really lucky. He then said that, to be honest, he had a great story that would move Seth, a tale of fiery friendship that would bring tears to his eyes. The spirit wondered about this whole story. Lionel sensed her, and began to explain that it was about the heroes who saved the country. Decades ago, we know this, the indestructible Blade and Wallace the Iron Walls. A great story indeed. As Lionel continued telling the story, dawn could have broken, and Seth had fallen asleep. When he woke up, he saw that Lionel was still talking to the water spirit. Seth decided to discuss the matter. As soon as he returned to the academy, back at the academy, Seth was talking with Carol, Drago, and Layla. Layla was curious about something that had moved, and Drago asked Seth if anything had happened during the break. Seth explained that it had just been a bit of training. She then suggested they visit the art museum together next time, mentioning that she had a friend who knew a lot about art. Seth agreed, saying it would certainly be useful. Drago asked everyone to join, and Caro agreed, saying leave it to me later. Everyone arrived at the museum to explore. Afterward, while they were heading back, Seth turned to Drago, and Drago took off his shirt to show off his body. Carol, in turn, unleashed her inferno, displaying her power. Even Blaze wasn't left behind, and showed off his own powers. Seth, however, was still worried about the water spirit. The scene changed to Seth training on the world tree. While working on his reflexes, Blaze commented that Seth had mastered his power to such an extent that it was almost like having a partner. He had surpassed the human limit so quickly. Seth replied that he never thought he would hear such words from Blaze. He assured him there was no need to worry, as the new techniques seemed almost complete. When Seth looked around, he noticed the snow. Realizing that winter had already arrived, he thought to himself that the time of the incident was approaching, and he still hadn't made the contract with the water spirit. While packing his things, Seth murmured that they should suspend the trial for a while, as he had something else to do. Blaze asked if he was sure he was finished with his training. Seth replied that the timing was right, but he could no longer ignore the power of the sacred tree. They had used a large amount of mana in their training, and it would take a few years to recharge. Seth bowed towards the tree, thanking it for helping him master Blaze's power so well. With the end of the year approaching, Seth realized there was no time to rest. Blaze wondered if this meant a great battle was approaching. Seth confirmed, explaining that before his return, humanity had been defeated by the evil god, and there were 4 main causes behind the defeat. One of them would occur in the next 7 days. Blaze asked what the 4 great causes of defeat were. Seth replied that, among the evil god's invasions, there were 4 particularly fatal events: the great promise of the dragon's silence, the destruction of the mage's army, the sudden disappearance of the royal capital, and the Taimon's 4-5, beginning of the underworld army's movement, in 7 days. Additionally, the sudden appearance of various undead caused great losses to both the mage's group and the civilians. Blazer asked if the undead were not considered a major threat. Barate replied that they wouldn't be if they were just common undead. However, the enemy undead were once heroes who were greatly respected and admired throughout the world. He suspected that a powerful force was behind this transformation, turning the dead into these special undead. At first he thought Giovanni might be the apostle behind it, but he found it hard to believe that Giovanni had enough power to command the underworld army. The incident that was about to happen in a few days was a tomb robbery in Elden Setsuna's hometown, where bodies were taken from the tombs of heroes. It was believed that the heroes' treasures were the original target. Blazer added that the real goal was the bodies themselves. Setsuna stated that he would go to the royal cemetery before the night of the incident to prevent it. While they were having a meal with friends, Layla asked Drago if he was going home for the winter break. Drago agreed, explaining that his father was going to teach him secret hand-to-hand combat techniques passed down through the generations. Carol said she was going to play with the Fenrir on the ice plains, in her family's territory, and asked if Blazer would like to join her. Blazer refused. Layla was amazed to learn that Carol's family owned a territory, and she couldn't even imagine it. Then Layla asked Setsuna how he planned to spend his time. He seemed to be deep in thought, and when she called him again, he looked surprised, asking what they were talking about. Layla thought he had gotten lost in thought again, and wondered if he was hiding something dangerous from them that he couldn't share. Carol then approached Layla and told her that Setsuna had a secret popularity among the girls, and if Layla didn't make a move soon, she might lose him. Layla denied it, saying that wasn't the case. Carol assured Layla that she didn't need to hide it. Layla then asked Setsuna where he was from. He replied that he was from an orphanage in the Udina region. Layla mentioned that it was very close to her family's inn. Cal, who was listening, interrupted and mentioned that her family had an inn. Setsuna asked who he was. The annoyed Cal replied that he was Cal the Noble. Then Cal invited Layla to join his salon, promising her a luxurious vacation far beyond the experience of staying at an inn. Well folks, this is the end of the video. If you liked it, comment for the next part, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Thanks for watching and see you next time.